Episode 11, as you can tell, we have a new background. We have special guests. We're pulling out all the stops here for episode 11 of season 2 of the Hoop Talk podcast. I'm obviously Mars. John D is my co-host, but we do have some special guests. We have Tyler, also known as Hoop Venue, and we have Sean, who is his co-host on the Hoop Venue podcast. Obviously, all links are in the description as always, but I would like you guys to introduce yourselves, as you can definitely do it better than I can. So, Tyler, tell the people a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, man, my name's Tyler. I'm the host of the Hoop Venue podcast alongside Sean and the creator of the Hoop Venue YouTube channel. I've been covering the NBA full time for close to 2 years now, I want to say, but like doing analysis, videos, breakdowns on all social media platforms for the last like 3 or 4 years. And yeah, basically, if you like basketball, you like watching coaching adjustments, you like watching player skill set, strengths, weaknesses, breakdowns, like 20-minute long YouTube videos, little video essays. That's pretty much my thing. I try to pump out as much content as I can. I'm a huge basketball junkie. And yeah, man, I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, and then I'm Sean, Tyler's co-host on the Hoop Venue podcast. Also on my own channel, the Sports Headline Show. A little inactive right now, but we'll be back here soon. I feel like I say that every time I'm talking with Tyler. But I coach basketball, high school basketball. This is, I think, technically like my 4th season covering the NBA. Although like years 1 and 2 were like really just focused on like the Lakers primarily, and then the last 2 covering the league as a whole for the past 2 years. And yeah, thanks so much for having us on, guys. Really excited for this one.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. As people can tell by the title, we are going to be discussing the best defenders of the 21st century. We did something not similar to this, but we did a top 10 peaks of the 21st century with Nerd Sesh, and now we have Hoop Venue over here for the top 10 defenders. Tyler told me he had 37 names. John D told me he had over 20 honorable mentions, and I have 8 people. So you can see who was more prepared than the others. But before we get into our top 10s and our honorable mentions, I want to ask everyone just what was their criteria when they were deciding the list. John D, what was you considering when you made this top 10?
One, I would look at how much I value their defense, as well as like being able to anchor a top tier defense. Also, what type of heights did they hit in the 21st century? And I did factor in some longevity as well. There are some points in this list where I valued longevity just a little bit higher than the others. So I would say a culmination of all 4 of those things would really put together my list.
Tyler?
Yeah, for me, I strictly went off of peaks, and I used longevity as like more of a tiebreaker for consistency purposes. But to me, it was like the absolute height you reached in the 21st century. And to determine that height for me, it's mostly like a film-based evaluation. I'm trying to watch on a possessional basis. Like, what does your motor look like? What type of reads are you making behind the play? Are you versatile? And that's a big thing for me because my evaluations all come down to playoff basketball. Like, playoff sample sizes are small, so we kind of have to project a little bit sometimes. But like for me, it's the chess match that comes into a deep playoff run. So like when a coach pushes one button, do you have the versatility and the flexibility to be able to adjust to that and still get your game off? And I think that's the big thing for me. So I'm thinking about it as playoff peaks within the 21st century.
Sean?
So it's kind of a weird like combination. I think everything you guys have already said. It's not only I think your peak, like your individual peak, like the heights that you reached and the heights that your team was able to reach when you were at your peak defensively. I think longevity does matter, and we'll get to that conversation in a little bit, obviously. And then obviously I think like specifically your role defensively, like how versatile can you be? Are you doing the thing that's the most important to your defense, which is like pretty consistently like anchoring a defense, protecting the basket, or are you a really good perimeter defender? And that weighs a lot as well. At least on my list, you're not going to see a lot of like perimeter defenders in my top 10. I would say that now. I have a lot in my honorable mentions list. But in my top 10, you're not going to see a bunch.
And can I also add real quick, my entire criteria, like I have all these different things I'm looking for to determine value, but the end goal is literally just how much are you influencing your team's defense? That's all I care about. Like if that means you're holding your individual matchup to 0 of 10 shooting, cool. But I think it's more valuable to impact the team level. So it's like when an offense tries to go to a specific action, can you consistently put yourself in a spot to influence that action? And that's why, as Sean mentioned, like a lot of perimeter defenders, offenses can go away from those guys and then their impact is somewhat diminished. And it's like you won't see the same type of reads from a perimeter defender that you'll see from a 7-footer who's just always in the play somehow.
Yeah, that was kind of my thought process. Was just at the end of the day, I think it all comes down to impact, like impact on the floor, how much you're helping your team's defense. The way you do it is secondary to that. Like there's different ways to impact the floor. But I do think there is one constant, and the most constant way to value, and no, the most constant way to impact the game on defense is to protect the basket, protect the paint, protect the rim. And I think we're probably going to see a consistent theme among all four of us with that thing in mind. But I do think, especially as the 21st century has gone on, I do think the onus on versatility, switchability, and all those scheme-related things that Tyler alluded to do become more relevant. And I think it's weird to say relative to era when I'm talking about a 25-year time frame. Like it's not like I'm going back to the 60s, but I do think relative to era is still relevant. I'm not going to ask a 2002 defender to do the same things as I'm asking a 2024 defender to do. So I'm going to keep them within the confines of the time in which they played. It is mainly peak based for me, mainly prime based. But if I do think there was a tiebreaker or it was close enough and someone gives me twice as much longevity at an elite level, I do think I would favor that player. So ultimately, I think you guys kind of hit the nail on the head on what I'm valuing. Just maybe I might slightly value longevity a bit more than you guys, but that's what we're here for, to get into what we agree and disagree on and to show some love to some of the best defenders of the last 25 years. But before we get into top 10s, I want to ask you guys, I'm going to ask each one of you, starting with Sean, who was your closest cut? Who was your number 11? Who just missed the cut?
Number 11 for me. By the way, I hate like 9 through like 13 for me. I feel really good about my top 8 actually. 9 through legit 13, I really, really hate myself for. The closest cutoff for me is Dikembe Mutombo, who dominated the early 2000s defensively. And then also like Alonzo Mourning, pretty similar, like early, like literally like 2000, 2001, maybe even 2002. Really, really dominant run. Won Defensive Player of the Year in 2001. Or
he won in 99.
99, 2000. Okay. Or wait.
No, 98, 99.
Okay.
He won 98, 99.
So it sounds like he fell off, man. It sounds like he fell off before the 2000s.
Yeah. He's done.
So I feel a lot better about that then. But really, Dikembe is the closest one off.
Did any of you guys have Dikembe on the list?
Yeah, Mutombo was my number 10.
Oh, okay. So
I had
Dikembe number 9.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't
that.
have Dikembe for the longevity reasons. I think the early 2000s, you get 2000, 2001, you can get those years in there where he was the best rim protector in the sport. I think that's a fair assessment.
Yeah,
the best rim protector in the sport.
Yeah.
He was just a dominating force. And I think one thing that people have started to come around to, the concept of deterrence. I think people have started to come around maybe because there's a 7'4" Frenchman in the league right now who I may get into. But that was Dikembe Mutombo personified. People didn't want to test him around the rim because they knew that right hand was just a monstrous shot blocking machine. And I don't factor this in too much, but I do think this definitely played a part. The psychological warfare, that the idea that if you got your shot blocked, you knew the finger wag was coming. You knew the no was coming. I definitely think that played a part in how people wanted to go at Dikembe. He was also a very good post defender. I know people have that vision of Shaq just bullying him. But at the end of the day, I think there's maybe one person on here who I trusted to guard Shaq consistently. But Dikembe, just as a pure rim protector, I do think he didn't make my list because of the longevity, but I do think as a pure rim protector, he is one of the 3 to 4 best rim protectors of the last 25 years. And that's despite the fact he was like 35 when the decade started.
Yeah, and I think Mutombo's the best example of what you brought up, where it's like the era difference. Like back then, you weren't expected to switch. You weren't expected to come out and defend ball screens in a hedge or trap. You were just expected to hold your own in the paint. And Mutombo is the guy I always go to where it's like, that's kind of what Rudy Gobert would look like if he played in a different era, where it's like, you're not stretched to the 3-point line. You're not expected to close out. You're not expected to do all these things. You can just hone in on rim protection. And Mutombo is just an unreal rim protector. I think the phenomenon with Mutombo that was tough for me though, is I think he hit an absolute peak from like 97 to 99. And I think 2000 was like the year where he slowly just started to taper off. And then the Hawks in 2000 had like the third worst defense in the league. And I was like, okay, does that mean Mutombo kind of fell off? But then he goes to the Sixers, and the Sixers have the best defense in the NBA. So I'm like, I didn't really know what to do with that. So he actually just snuck in as my number 10, but right there with a few other guys.
John, you said you had him at 9, so you seem to be the highest on Dikembe. I think we're all high on Dikembe, but you had him the highest. So what was the thought process with Dikembe?
The rim protection and being the defensive anchor for a finals team that got to the finals off the back of their defense. So the way he was able to clean up some of the things of the guys on the perimeter, being able to have that rim deterrence, being able to be such a great rebounder. So a lot of those things I valued, especially being the anchor to a team that ended up getting to the finals off the backs of their defense, especially at the age of 35. That's something I had to show love to.
Oh, so the age part, I can definitely understand that. I also think similar to the era thing, it's like when you have that level of rim protector in an era where there is no defensive 3 seconds, like when we're talking about 2000, 2001, like he's genuinely able to stay as close to the rim as possible and just destroy teams' offenses in an era where teams' offenses were already struggling, and he's taken away the easiest shot in basketball for the most part. And he did something that I guess was pleasantly surprising when you go back and watch Dikembe on film, was A, his willingness to go and contest every shot. That's something that was really impressive. And B, he didn't foul that much. Especially once you get to he gets older and wiser, he really just didn't foul that much. So he was just constantly altering shots, blocking shots, while also not playing in foul trouble and not putting teams on the line. So that was definitely something that was surprising going back and watching Dikembe on film, especially this older, more mature version of Dikembe. So I want to make sure I've got this right. We have Tyler having Dikembe at 10. And we have John having Dikembe at 9 and Sean just having him off the list. Since John had Dikembe the highest, I want to ask John, who did you have as your closest cut?
My closest cut, it's between a few players because I really think we're about to move into one of the best defensive eras in the NBA with all the young bigs that we have. And I would say, to be honest, my toughest cut was like Evan Mobley, Chet, and Bam. Those three guys are generational defenders as bigs, the way they're so mobile, the way they can defend the rim and they can step out in space. So when I look at these three guys, especially Bam Adebayo, how versatile he is on the defensive end and probably being one of the most versatile bigs we have ever seen, and Evan Mobley being able to guard the rim so effectively and guard in the post so effectively, and Chet Holmgren being way more aggressive than he gets credit for when he's blocking shots and he has active hands. So these three guys, I wanted to put them on the list, and I was really considering having them at number 10 and just being a three-way tie, but they just missed the cut for me. But I don't think there's much longer before they find their way onto this list.
Did any of you guys get those young guys in? Evan Mobley, Chet, or Bam? Did they make the cut?
None of them made my top 10. Mobley and Chet, I was a little bit lower on, and I think it's just like a projection thing. Like I think they're gonna be there, but I still need to see a little bit more. Especially from Chet, because he's only played like a full season of games at this point. I did have Bam as like my fourth guy off though. Like Bam's the way Bam's versatility unlocked the Heat in those playoff runs, they consistently had like a number 1 or number 2 playoff defense for half a decade, and they were playing Duncan Robinson and Tyler Hero for 48 minutes. Like Bam, Bam, unreal defender.
I had Bam on my honorable mentions list as well, simply because kind of like Tyler said, he's one of the versatility kings, especially of like the last 10 years or so. He's one of the versatility kings in the league. Evan Mobley I thought about. Chet I didn't really think about because that would be projecting. And those two guys were more victim of like longevity. And Chet especially because we saw one playoff run and one regular season from him. But I absolutely see the vision with both of those guys.
I'm not gonna lie. I did a lot of projecting with my 10 spot. A lot.
Oh, okay. I believe I know who you are.
I wonder.
I believe I know. But before we get to that guy, I did consider all three of them. Bam was the hardest one for me to leave off. My concern with Bam was just the overall rim protection. The level of rim protector I think he was. I think he's the most I think it's fair to say he's the most switchable center of the last 25 years. I think that's fair to say. I don't think there's anyone I'm missing. Maybe there's someone's going to be in the chat. Well, this guy.
Well,
but I do believe it probably is bad.
The guys who you could compare to him in switchability, I feel like are all classified as 4s, whereas Bam has been a full-time 5 his entire career.
Yeah,
yeah. So I think that switchability was extremely valuable, and like you said, those playoff defenses in Miami were really, really good for a really long time, with some of the most questionable personnel of an elite defense I've probably ever seen. But I just think overall, rim protection being the most valuable form of defense, and Bam has never really been a great rim protector. And I only think in the last 2 years he's really become a really good drop defender. I think most of before then he was actually more of a hedge switch defender, and he wasn't that good in drop. So I think the versatility part of it actually was kind of overstated, because I view versatility as more than just how many positions can you guard, it's how many schemes can you play in. Like you said about playoff matchups and playoff adjustments, all of those things. I think Bam was kind of more limited in that versatility aspect up until a few years ago. That's kind of what held him back for me. Evan Mobley, I do think it is a longevity thing with Evan Mobley. I do think in terms of versatility and rim protection, he is elite. It's just the sample size, and then overall, I just think there's some guys who have shown me more over a prolonged period of time. And I think it's the same with Chet. Although in the one playoff run I've seen from Chet, I do think he was probably the best defender in the postseason. So he does get, I guess, some bonus for that, because he was an amazing rim protector in that playoff run with OKC.
I think my hangback with Chet actually came from the playoffs, and it's the fact that of any full-time 5 rim protector I have on the list, Chet is like considerably the weakest rebounder. And I think like that really matters from your 5, because like we saw it in the Dallas series. One of the moments that swung that game 6 was Lively grabbing like 3 or 4 offensive rebounds in a row and just like giving them a bunch of second chances. And then with Mobley, I think it's kind of like the leap you were talking about from Bam. I think Mobley still has a ways to improve as a drop defender. And I think he kind of has that masked by Cleveland because he's playing with another guy who's like a top 5 drop defender in the league. And I think like Mobley as a full-time 5 having to play a lot of drop maybe wouldn't be able to replicate the value of some of the top 10 guys, in my opinion. I could be wrong. It's just like, that's kind of how I feel.
Yeah, I definitely think that's a very valid concern with concern. I don't know if concern's the right word. Very valid thing to point out with
pairs when we're talking about guys this good.
Yeah, like, I'm not about to be like, well, he's actually not that good of a defender. Like, we're obviously talking about elite defenders here, so we're really just saying, well, this guy is elite, but maybe he'd be even more elite. So we've got 3 honorable mentions from John. Thank you very much. Tyler, who do you have as your closest cut?
I will throw 2 because one of them Sean already kind of mentioned. Alonzo Mourning was my first guy off, and I feel like I don't really have to go too in depth with that because it's kind of the same thing as Mutombo, like that era, mega rim protector. And I just think the difference is that Mutombo was a little bit bigger, a little bit lengthier, a little bit better of a shot blocker. And so it's like, if I have to split the hairs, I think Mutombo barely gets the edge over Mourning. But my next guy off was Wembanyama. And I was like, it's like this current version of Wemby right now. I just think like, I still think the technique has a ways to go, and which is insane to say because he's already probably going to win Defensive Player of the Year. But just in terms of like not biting on fakes, not overcommitting on the perimeter, he's still a little bit funky on switches sometimes just because he's figuring out how to use those ridiculous limbs. And then his positioning and drop can be a little bit off at times. But in terms of just sheer defensive playmaking ability and tools, like the agility, the length, he just breaks he breaks all of the rules of defense. And I think you just have to throw him either in the top 10 or right there, just in terms of like, even without projection, it's clear as day how much of a defensive game changer he is. So he was actually my number 12.
John, you had him at number 10, right?
Yeah, I had him at number 10. And once again, the game wrecking from Victor Wembanyama is historical. We see a guy that's 7'4" who can recover, block shots, who can be in multiple places at once. So based off of just his size and frame alone, that could make him an already plus defender just walking into the NBA. But now he's starting to be less aggressive. He's still really aggressive when he is trying to block shots and going for steals and jumping out to the perimeter. But I'm starting to see a learning curve there to where he is getting better. And I see the signs of him getting better as the season goes along. So just being able to have that deterrence, like whether it's in transition, people are kicking it out to three instead of trying to pull up on Wemby or just trying to drive to the rim. All that stuff is important. And if we look at how good the Spurs defense is when he is on the floor versus when he's not, I played that into factor as well. Just having a below average defense around him or defensive pieces around him and being able to rise that as just being on the floor. And I also looked at how he guarded Jokic. I think he guarded Jokic, one of the, like, just being able to have Jokic adjust his shots and change the way he played. Jokic played a lot out more to the perimeter against Wemby, just with running floaters or shooting threes, just to keep him out of the paint to get better looks for the Nuggets. So a lot of that stuff I valued, and I had him at number 10.
We're going to ignore the numbers Jokic actually put up because that doesn't give Wemby the greatest credit for how good of a defender he actually really was in those games against Jokic, which is ridiculous, but that's a whole nother story for another day. I know Tyler doesn't have Wemby. Sean, did Wemby make your cut?
Wemby is also my number 10. And I was going back and forth the entire time, even like honestly, midway through Tyler talking about Wemby for a sec. But I think it's to what you guys were just saying about Wemby. Very few players arguably ever deter more shots from just their sheer presence than Wemby. You added with just the ridiculous length, the recovery speed, honestly, like there'll be plays. There's a specific play. You've probably seen it float around on Twitter. It's like Sabonis, who's pretty, big. He can throw his body around at you. Sabonis does like a good job of, getting body position. He actually bumps Wemby halfway across the floor, but Wemby's recovery speed and reaction time just doesn't matter. And he's still, I think he either blocked the shot or just like, forced to miss at the rim. And having that ability to deter shots consistently, which is going to, throw out a RAM number, cause the team to shoot 5 less, shots at the rim per game. And you turn 5 less 60% shots into 5 more 40% twos, like long twos or whatever. That's incredibly valuable. And Wemby does it surely off of his presence and his height and his length in general. And this is a little bit of projecting because Wemby, with like some of the technique stuff that Tyler brought up, I do think there's been a decent jump from year 1 to year 2 in that regard. Like if you ran this back in 2030, I would be shocked if Wemby was not like consensusly in the top 5.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
I would say top 3.
Yeah.
Well, no, I would say top 3.
Well, and also I'm glad you brought up like the deterring like 5 shots a game, for example, thing, because like when you break it down so you got like 5 shots that just aren't going to be taken at the rim. You've got 20 shots that are taken at the rim, but at a 10% worse clip. Yeah. You've got like 4 more shots that he blocks. And it's like when you just check all these boxes, it's like, okay, now he's just taking the most valuable shot on the floor and turning it into like a mid-range jumper. And it's like for an entire team. And I think I'm almost ready to jump the gun and throw him in my top 10, but some of the technique stuff I think could show up in the playoffs. So I'm kind of just like waiting to see like how he would respond to like a creative offense. Like if they go up against the Thunder in the playoffs, like I want to see what he's able to do as the Thunder throw different like looks at him. That's
something that I think I would be a little concerned with because Wemby is still a fantastic defender, but I still think you can scheme against him. Like I think build a scheme to where you can make him not as effective as he would be in the regular season, offensively and defensively. So that's something that does concern me.
I think Wemby's also in my top 10. I think he has the best physical tools of anyone we're going to say on this list. 7'4", 8 foot wingspan, some of the most fluid movement, quick off the ground. He doesn't even need to get off the ground to reach 10 feet, but quick off the ground. The dexterity is amazing. So the tools alone already just made him an elite defender. And I do agree that I think he's the most error-prone defender on this list, or even as an honorable mention on this list. I think in terms of the amount of mistakes he'll make in terms of positioning or just execution, he's at the top of the list. And I think, actually, he might be second on the list because there's someone who I want to talk about later, but top 2 in terms of errors. But he just has such a great physical profile. He's just able to make up for most of the mistakes he makes to the point where people don't even recognize he's making mistakes unless you're actually deep diving into this film. You're like, well, if he just rotated half a second earlier, he doesn't need to come save the play. He's stopped the play from even happening. But he's just able to do those things because he's amazing. I do think he's cleaned up some of his drop coverage, especially from where he was last season. Still allows the big to get behind him on too many occasions, in my opinion. and sometimes struggles to contain the ball. But still, I think a very good pick and roll defender. I don't like him as a switch defender at all. I don't think he's there yet, which is fine. Like, I don't think he's ever going to be used as a switch defender. It's going to be a last resort. But still, overall, just the impact he has, and you guys have all alluded to it, on just teams' offenses at the rim just stagnate because of his mere presence. And anytime you could take away the most valuable shot on the court, we're going to say this a lot for a lot of people, but anytime you can take away the most valuable shot on the floor at the clip that Wemby does it, that's extremely valuable defense. And I think when it comes down to the playoff schemes and why I guess I'm less concerned about it than maybe you guys, the Spurs do a really good job of keeping him near the rim.
Yeah.
So they'll do a lot of pre-switching, they'll do a lot of scram switching. So Wemby is still the closest to the rim at all times. And I understand some elite offensive coaches can still scheme away from that, or just have Wemby maybe 2 feet away from where he needs to be in terms of having off-ball actions occurring, where Wemby needs to be involved in all of those things. But the Spurs already seem to be aware of their defense has no shot if Wemby's not near the rim. So if they can keep him near the rim, I don't think you're going to be able to take away that impact. And I don't think the Spurs are going to be fooled into Wemby having to switch or Wemby having to play up and pick and rolls and all of those things. So I think his defense is going to translate pretty well to the postseason. And I think the bigger concern is the personnel around him. And that's why he's not going to have a number one defense this year, a number one defense next year, unless they drop. I'm here hoping for Cooper Flagg in San Antonio, but that's a whole different conversation.
Ew,
but
no.
that's what we need.
How do we get to that?
I need Wemby to lead some elite defenses. Cooper Flagg's going to help that happen. But maybe I am a bit premature. But I do have Wemby in my team.
One variable that I think is so important to consider with the pick and roll defense too is, like, in a lot of playoff series, you'll see like drop isn't an option. Like, I think against Dallas, Gobert dropping wasn't an option, so they switched to a hedge. Like, they started hedging or blitzing Luka, get the ball out of his hands. One thing that I think is so funny about Wemby is drop is literally always an option because he has an 8-foot wingspan. Like, you'll see him drop and still block a pull-up 3-point shooter. So he literally never has to hedge. That doesn't matter. Like, it's completely irrelevant to him. You'll barely ever see him hedge because his drop basically does what you want a hedge to do. So that's kind of like part of him just being a game breaker.
I want to add one more thing to the Wemby discussion right quick. One of the best attributes I think you can credit to, like, a Rudy Gobert, for example, is kind of what you were just talking about with the lack of great defensive personnel around Wemby. You go back to, like, Rudy's prime or whatever in Utah. Those defenses were elite because of Rudy Gobert. They did not have good defensive talent around Rudy ever. And then he gets to Minnesota, has some good defensive talent. And again, they're really, really good defense around him. So
people find a way to slander him still.
It's pretty easy. I will admit, it's decently easy. You just clip Luka. Clip Luka, one of the best offensive players, frying him in space, and that's all you have to do.
It's like, bro.
Oh, Trey Man dropped 40, bro. Terrence Man dropped 40.
Don't get me started on that game. I've had so many arguments about that game. But now we've got everyone's got their number 10. Tyler has Dikembe, Sean and John D have Wemby. John D has Dikembe at 9. So I'm gonna ask Sean, who is your number 9?
My number 9 is Shaq. It's still Shaq, like early 2000 Shaq. Really, basically, you're relying a lot on, like, 2004 last year in LA. Shaquille O'Neal, still ultra physical, ultra dominant around the basket for them. And I mean, it's one of the reasons why we call him one of the most dominant players is because of the offense, obviously. But what he was able to do for those Lakers defenses in the playoffs were still really, really valuable. And like I said, I hate my 9 through 13. Like, I could probably rearrange this and find Alonzo Mourning here or Dikembe here even. But I ultimately landed with Shaq here as my number 9.
Shaq was an interesting one.
I can't get there with Shaq. I'm probably the highest person you will ever meet on Shaq's offense. I think it's funny, actually. Sean and I had this discussion, and I told him that I think Shaq, like, is right up there with MJ and LeBron for peaks. And he was kind of like, well, and I was like, dude, I'm telling you, like, I'm so in on Shaq's offense. The defense to me is so inconsistent, though. Like, you'll have stretches of games where he just deliberately will not leave the paint. And it's like he's facing a stretch big that just gets a pick and pop over and over. Like, I think the Kings series, specifically in 02, he would not step out and guard those guys like Weber. He would not step out. And I think that's a problem. And I also think, like, Shaq was a mega rim protector, but he's in the same era as Mourning and Mutombo, who I just think were considerably better rim protectors. So if that is the argument, then I feel like you have to credit Shaq for being a little bit more versatile than those guys. But then, like I said, it's so inconsistent that I just can't get there with Shaq. So Shaq, to me, I didn't really consider him, but I do still think, like, in the scope of NBA history, pretty underrated defensive peak just because he was such a dominant offensive player.
Yeah, I didn't. My issue with Shaq was the inconsistency. I think 2000 Shaq was the most dialed in I think I'd seen him on defense, and it also is the best he ever was on offense, which is why I concur with, you can make the argument that Shaq's peak is up there with MJ and LeBron in NBA history. But then 2001 it tapered off and then ramped back up in the postseason, and then 2002 and 03 and 04 and beyond it's sometimes you're going to get one of the most dominant interior forces on both sides of the ball. Sometimes it's just going to be an offensive thing, and then the outright refusal to leave the restricted area most of the time, but just the paint in general, was something that I do think was damaging. I think, like, the go-to example is like Mike Bibby in the playoffs, just constantly torching that Lakers pick and roll defense, and it's because Shaq wouldn't leave the paint. I remember I was watching a game, I think it was the Lakers and the Sonics, and Ray Allen was just getting open jumper after open jumper because Shaq just didn't leave the paint on these off-ball screens. I don't know how many points Ray actually had, but, like, I was losing count. It was just a lot of jumper after jumper after jumper because Shaq wouldn't leave the paint. I think that would be more damaging, obviously, in today's game, but even back then, it was still something that did cost his defense a few points. So I didn't think of pure rim protection, it was enough for me to have Shaq on the list, especially when the motor and all the other issues that were there still persisted, even in his better seasons like 2001, especially that regular season. So Shaq just didn't make the cut for me, but I can definitely understand, just off that pure rim protection value, having him in at number 10. John, did you have Shaq on the list?
I had Shaq at number 8 with the rim protection.
So we're halfway through John's list at this point. Okay. Great.
Yeah, I had Shaq at number 8. I really valued the rim protection and the rebounding and the post defense that Shaq provided. I would say 2000 and 2001 is why I wouldn't have him higher, because I think he did fall from 2002 to 03 to 04 to where the effort just wasn't there, and then he gets significantly slower, just like protecting the rim. I think he was still a solid rebounder, but you can tell, like, once he got to the Heat, like, the defense that he touched in 2000 and 2001 just wasn't there anymore.
Yeah, in 04, I think he was like 360 pounds during the season or something like that.
Yeah, it was.
I think the thing that bothers me with Shaq, though, is, like, whenever it was like a game-winning possession, like they needed a stop, he showed that he could be like a defensive player of the year every time. It was just so, like, hit or miss. You never knew when the ball was coming down the court if you were going to see, like, 2000s version of Jokic, where he's just kind of like, I'm going to sit in the paint, do whatever, like maybe get a hand on the ball, or you're going to see, like, Dikembe Mutombo going to block a shot off the glass. And it's like, yeah, because there was one play in the playoffs, I can't remember what game it was, where Shaq actually, like, blitzed a pick and roll. The ball handler turned the corner and he chased him all the way to paint and swatted into the crowd. And I was like, bro, that's like all-time defender stuff. But then you get it for one possession.
Yeah, like that's always the issue with Shaq, is just the consistency of it. If Shaq could put together not even just season, like on a possession-to-possession basis, like you alluded to, if he could just give you these prolonged stretches of that elite defense, I think I would have had to have him on the list. It's just it was one possession, I'll give you the best defense you've ever seen. Then the next possession, I look like Karl Anthony Towns. It's like
respect Big Purr. Respect Big Purr.
I promise you, he's not on this list. I promise you, he's not on.
I don't know.
list.
Did you see his defense on Jokic in the playoffs? I don't know, man.
Oh yeah, I was told very positive on defense because
Cat was more valuable than Rudy.
Hey, let's not slander Cat on this final afternoon. So that's Sean's number 9. I've got John's number 8. So Tyler, who do you have at number 9?
Yeah, my number 9, I felt pretty good about this. It was same thing as Mutombo and Mourning, but just another step forward was 2000 David Robinson. That was my number 9. David Robinson at his peak, I think, is arguably like 3rd or 4th best defender ever. And I just think we're talking about a slower version of it. You got like this insane physical profile, like super tall, super strong, super long arms, insane vertical pop. And it's like, take that and just take it down a notch, like make it slightly worse by the time it's 2000. He's had some injuries. He's a little older, but just in terms of like that twin tower look with Duncan, man, just absurd rim protector, absurd post defender, absurd rebounder. I think it's just a pretty easy argument to make. You just got this giant rim protector in an era where that was the most valuable thing. And the Spurs defenses were historically dominant in the early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
He was my number 8.
Number 8. Interesting. Okay, these lists are starting to shape out. I like it. John D, let me guess number 7.
No, he actually didn't make my list.
Oh, okay. Longevity reasons.
He was a tough cut. Yeah, he was a tough cut.
I think David Robinson, and this goes just to him as a player. I think David Robinson, like Tim Duncan years, are just very underrated in terms of how good he still was.
Yeah.
I'm of the opinion that let me not die on a hill I don't want to die on. I don't think 99 does not count for this list, but I don't think that Tim Duncan was definitively the best player.
I agree. No, I'm glad. I thought that's what you were going to say. I agree.
Yeah. I agree. I understand Tim Duncan won the Finals MVP, and history will always say he was the better player. But at that time, I still think it was a 1A, 1B. You could go either way. I don't know who the better player is. That's how I feel about 99, David Robinson. And in 2000, I think what doesn't help is that Tim Duncan was hurt in the playoffs and then they lost in round 1. So it's like, oh, well, David Robinson needed Tim Duncan. But just defensively, he was, like you said, still a monster at that time. He wasn't as quick on the outside as he used to be, but that rim protection was still elite. And his second jump and his first jump off the ground was amazing. I like getting off the ground as quick as he did, reaching the apex of his jump and just swatting shots was fantastic. And as a post defender, his strength was just top 5, I want to say, on this list of the people I have. Top 5. I think that's comfortable. I think I'll say top 5. And in an era where post defense was as valuable as it was, having a guy like David Robinson who was as good in the post as he was something that provided a lot more value than it would in today's game, for example, which is why Karl Anthony Towns is not going to make this list because post defense has just become less and less valuable.
I'm starting to think you don't like Karl Anthony Towns.
Defensively, you're right. Yeah, defensively, absolutely right. I do not like. I think the only concern I guess I would have about David Robinson was just his tendency to overcommit on certain plays, whether that's him shading someone too hard baseline or too hard middle, or he's jumping on a fake. Like, once again, we're nitpicking. I'm not like saying this is making him a bad defender, but that's like my only nitpick is just that sometimes he would be a bit too eager to block a shot or to alter a shot and he would find himself out of position. But I do think he even cleaned that up in his later years. And also the minutes played just steadily going down in the 2000s. So just overall how much impact he can make on a per game basis was why I didn't have him on my list, because the minutes was just declining each year, which is to be expected. I think he retired at 37. So we weren't going to see much more than we did. But 34-year-old David Robinson single season peak definitely is someone I would probably have in my top 10. Just the longevity is why I couldn't get him on the list. But definitely can understand having him at number 9. But since we have Sean and John's number 8s with David Robinson and Shaq, Tyler, I need to know who your number 8 is.
Yeah, this is where I got my guy Rudy Gobert. I think he's the biggest victim of where I lean into playoffs as like my whole thing, because I don't think Rudy Gobert is some bad playoff defender. That's the most absurd thing that people run with. I think if it was regular seasons, he'd probably be my number 1. Like the stretch he had from 17 to 21, where the Jazz were just a walking number 1 defense with whoever, especially 2021. Like the fact that people were seriously debating him versus Simmons, while the Jazz had the number 1 defense with their point of attack being Conley, Mitchell, O'Neal and Bogdanovich, like, bro, what are we doing? Like, what are we doing? I think Gobert is just like, I think he's the best drop defender ever. We can start there. And I think that's why he's such an elite regular season floor raiser. Because if you have a guy who can just drop all the time, your floor is so high on defense. It's like the teams are just going to walk into mid-range jumpers. And it's like, you're just getting a lot of stops off that. I think in the playoffs, he suffers from the era. I think it's just, this guy is more versatile, more mobile than he gets credit for. He's way better on switches than he gets credit for. But in comparison to the guys that I'm going to have above him, it's either they played in an era where they didn't have to do that as much, or they play in the same era and we've seen playoff offenses throw more at them and then them have more counters. Like, I think the Dallas series, I don't think Gobert was bad in that series, but I do think it highlighted the fact that he just can't cover ground at the level of the modern big. It's like, you either have to blitz Luka or you can't drop. You either have to blitz or hedge, and then you're not quick enough to recover every time. And it's like, yeah, it's tough to do against Luka, but we're talking about the best defenders ever. It's just, you have to split hairs. So for me, it's so funny because I'm such a huge Gobert guy, and I'm probably going to end up with him lowest on my list. But it's just like, it's just when it gets to the playoffs, there's a few other guys from this era that I think just give you a little bit more schematic flexibility.
And what's so crazy to me is he just had an amazing series against Phoenix. He was guarding
that nobody talked about.
Nobody talked about it. He played great on Book, Beal, KD. I think they all shot like minus their league average or minus their averages on him when Rudy was guarding them. And just to say this real fast, when I'm at barbershops or family events and people bring up basketball, I always ask them how they feel about Rudy Gobert, so I know what type of conversation we can have.
Litmus test.
Rudy Gobert and your litmus test.
Yeah, it's just like we're gonna test the waters. We're gonna see what type of conversations we have. Because once again, you brought it up. One of the best drop defenders I have ever seen. The way he's able to tag the roll man and stick to the guard and disrupt the pass or disrupt an easy layup. I really value that. The rebounding, the rim protection, the polish he has as a rim protection, the rim protector, the way he was able to recover for his perimeter defenders in Utah, and then the game against the Clippers. I don't even want to, but I'm really high on Rudy Gobert, and I had him at number 7.
I'm surprised Tyler had him so low.
Yeah,
like that's what my reaction was. I totally expect you to have him like top 5.
Let me save myself really quick and say that 5 through 8 for me, it's like the most minuscule difference. Like, I think there's a tier jump to top 4, but in terms of like Gobert, you could slide him up to 5 and I wouldn't feel any differently about him.
I can see that 100%.
Where was the highest you had him, John? Or was
7? The highest I had Rudy Gobert? It was I would say I had him as high as 5. I had him as high as 5, and you can convince me that he's better than my 6 and 5 because once again, what you value could be different. So I can see it.
One thing that's underrated with Gobert as a rim protector too is we've talked about a few guys who sometimes overcommit, bite on fakes. Gobert never ever falls for anything. He's just always in the right spot.
Yeah,
so disciplined. Sean, where did you have Rudy?
I have Rudy as my number 6. It's truly because I value how elite of a drop big he is. And I think, honestly, the problem with Rudy is it's just going to be those off matchups in a playoff series where you get a Dallas series and then you can have the perception on him drop a lot because, you can only really blitz. You don't want to drop with Luka at all. You can drop is not an option. And it's unfortunate because that's what Rudy is like the king of. He's the king of drop. But honestly, I think it's only certain matchups with Rudy where it can really, really be a problem. But other than that, man, he gives you such a ridiculous floor. And that goes, again, to the point that we've already talked about with those Utah teams, egregiously bad defensive talent around an all-time defender. They were consistently top 3, top 5, whatever. It obviously gets to Minnesota, helps anchor them defensively to a Western Conference Finals. Like you already brought up, that Phoenix series that nobody talks about. And also longevity too with Gobert. Like, he's not the same as he was like that 2017, 2021 run. But if you ask about if you had an unbiased list of people that didn't for some reason hate Rudy Gobert to poll where they would put Rudy at currently, defensively today, every single one of them would have him still as a top 8 defender in the league. That's probably on the low end. So to say you've been a top 8 defender for a decade almost, like that's something that has to get thrown into the conversation as well.
Yeah, Rudy, I think you guys have covered it. Definitely one of, if not the best drop bigs ever. I'm gonna give some love to my guy Roy Hibbert, but generally speaking, definitely one of the best drop bigs. And I do think his switchability is understated because of Steph Curry putting him in the spin cycle and Luka doing what he did. So you see those examples. I think Chris Paul embarrassed him too.
Oh no, quick shifty guards.
Multiple
elite on-ball players.
Right, and I'm trying to make the good point for Rudy, so I'm gonna stop talking about the ones I remember. But yeah, I just think the thing that gave me hesitation with Rudy is I think as you get higher on this list, I get to the point where it's like I don't think a scheme exists that lowers or mitigates your value. I think with Rudy Gobert, those schemes have existed and still do exist. And some of that's not entirely his fault. Like, I'm never going to blame that Terrence Mann game on him. I'll never do it. No matter how many times I rewatch the game, I just come to the same conclusion and double down on it even more. It wasn't his fault. If you're giving up straight line drives to the rim, at some point you're going to ask for help. So I don't know what you want the guy to do. So I'm never going to blame him for that. But I do think him having to play drop coverage, him being less effective away from the basket, especially in the era, like you said, that is asking bigs to do more and more defensively, I do think it is not in his best interest to do that. Now, if he peaked in the early 2010s, I do think I probably would have had him number 1, number 2, number 3 on this list, because that's when drop coverage was really becoming the craze and teams were still shooting pull-up 18-footers out of drop coverage. If that's what you had with Rudy Gobert, I think, this is a whole different conversation. But once teams started taking those pull-up threes and drop, and teams started realizing if we can try to pull this guy away from the rim, we have a better chance. I do think that held him back just a little bit. But I do think 5 through 7, 5 through 8 is the fair range for Rudy Gobert. I think I'm glad all of us have some common sense and didn't be like, he's overrated. He shouldn't have these defense played years, yada, yada, yada. Yeah. So I'm glad that we got to the bottom of that with Rudy. I am curious to see if the guy who I definitely have below Rudy, you guys have above him. But so with that being said, I'm actually going to ask Sean, since you have Rudy the highest, who do you have at number 7?
This is the only perimeter player I'm throwing on the list. The rest of the list are all bigs. Because I think if you look at overall peaks, I think this player had the best peak of any perimeter player over the past like 10 years plus. And he's also been, he's not the same guy now, but he's been like, he has really good longevity defensively as well. And that is specifically 2014, 2015, Kawhi Leonard. Those 2 years specifically, and then you add on the longevity from Kawhi, like insane level of defense from perimeter isolation. He just has perfect hands to be able to get in the passing lanes and nuke defenses. Obviously, you have the memories of those playoff runs and him guarding at the point of attack or being an elite wing stopper, good help defender as a low man, or like I said, being active, being able to create deflections and create havoc. I think one of the best things that a defensive wing or a defensive guard can do now is, one of the things we look at is like defensive playmaking, like your steal, how many steals can you force? How many deflections are you getting? Obviously blocks and things like that. And Kawhi was fantastic at that for the last 4 years of that San Antonio run. And then when he needed to, like in Toronto for sure. So for me, I have Kawhi Leonard at 7. Again, the only perimeter player I even considered on the list was Kawhi Leonard. And that's, I guess, the credit to how much I value him, specifically in 2014, 2015, where he was just disgusting. Yeah, like Ligma says in the chat, he was disgusting those 2 years.
I might be the highest on Kawhi. I had him at 5. I had Kawhi at 5. The thing with Kawhi, I think, one, his footwork on the perimeter was phenomenal. The way he's able to beat guys to their spots and the strength that he does possess, not allowing a perimeter player to try and bully his way to the basket once he's already beaten you to his spot, forces turnovers and forces passes.
His recovery time is insane too.
Exactly.
Like even on the off chance you did beat him, his recovery and his hands are just stupid.
He was never out of a play. That just didn't exist.
Literally, the length, the being able to guard in the post, bigger wings, being able to guard guards, being able to be a great low man or a help defender, playing passing lanes, just completely wrecking the game and being able to fly all around the floor. I think Kawhi Leonard is up there, man. I have him at number 5.
Yeah, my thing with Kawhi, so I actually made a video over the offseason called like why Kawhi Leonard is the perfect wing defender, just to like hammer home. I love Kawhi, man. Like in terms of, I think he is alongside Rodman. I think those are the two best man defenders ever. I think with Kawhi, you have so much versatility. You've got like, he can navigate screens, absurd lateral quickness, 7'3" wingspan, ridiculous hands. In terms of just like, I need you to go out there and take out a matchup. Like, I need you to go up against the Rockets, and I need you to take Harden out of the game as much as you can. I don't think there's anyone in league history that can consistently do that with players in the way Kawhi can. I have two hangbacks. One is, I think, of any player I considered for the list, he pretty clearly to me has the worst defensive awareness away from the ball. And what I mean by that is like he'll lose cutters. He'll miss like a tag on a roll or something like that. And it's not necessarily that he's a bad off-ball defender. It's just like you have these lapses that I don't think you have with the other top guys. Like I think this is a post-prime Kawhi, but a great example to me is the Kings game from a couple years ago that ended with like a score of 180 to 175. Like in those fourth quarter and OTs, Kawhi lost cutter after cutter after cutter. And it was like kind of annoying. And then that to me is something that like, it's ingrained in you. It's not like he became less smart than he was during his peak. Like it's not that he just like forgot how to tag a cutter. I just think it's like it's just an inherent issue with him. And the second one to me is what I talked about earlier with the way on-ball defenders are already limited in the way that they can impact an offense. Like to me, the big thing is the 2016 playoffs against the Thunder. He had nothing for Westbrook. Westbrook beat him time and time again. And the Spurs just like really didn't have a chance in that series because Westbrook got to the paint every single time. And then it got to a point where they put Kawhi on Andre Roberson because he couldn't match up with either Westbrook or KD. And Kawhi in that roamer roll off of Roberson is still an elite defensive playmaker. But when we compare him to other guys who are just shutting off the paint, I don't think it's the same type of impact on the team. So to me, Kawhi was my third guy off. He was the highest of any wing defender for me, but I just couldn't get any perimeter guys in me. He was one of only two wings that I considered. It was him and Karolinko. AK-47 was the other wing that I considered.
He's one of my 25 honorable mentions.
What an honor. I think everyone made good points about Kawhi. I think the one thing that always drew me to Kawhi was he wasn't a rim protector by any sense of the word. He could block some shots, but he wasn't much of a rim protector. But his help at the nail, taking away the middle of the floor away from the ball. Yeah. Like, I don't know if I can call that rim protection, but in my mind, it's like, well, you just denied someone from even getting to the rim on a drive. So in some ways, you've protected the rim. Like, that's how I was viewing that. And it's like, I think he might be the most dangerous nail defender ever. His hands targeting the ball, the strength, the ability to just rip the ball away from people was just second to none. And I do think he was susceptible to like uber quickness, which is to be expected when you're 6'7" trying to guard 6'2", 6'3" guys. But just generally speaking, as a man defender, I don't think there was anyone who was responsible for less breakdowns maybe than Kawhi. But I did have similar concerns with the off-ball stuff. But he wasn't the only wing I considered. I don't know how you guys categorize LeBron, but I definitely
he was
him.
Honorable mention.
He was on my long list because so I had like 2 honorable mentions list. I had like my 5 or 6 that I really considered, and then I had my list of 37. And on that list, I also had Paul George on the Pacers. I had Tony Allen. I had Shane Battier, Iguodala. Who else did I have? Sean Marion. I think you could consider a wing defender. Ron Artest, defensive player of the year, Ron Artest. Ben Simmons, I think, was also another good one.
Thank you. I thought I was crazy.
Another underrated one, Robert Covington, I think, is another one that I.
2018, Robert Covington. 2018.
The last one for me was Jason Kidd. I think Jason Kidd was another one.
He was the only guard I considered. He was the only guard I even looked
Jason
at.
Kidd.
I think he's the best point guard defender ever, but that's another conversation for a different day. But yeah, the wings I'm like seriously considered were Kawhi, Paul George, and LeBron. I think Pacers Paul George is one of the
Unreal.
best wing defenders.
Yeah.
I think the offense extremely overrated, the defense extremely underrated for that Pacers Paul George.
Yeah.
But Kawhi, for me, the reason I had him on the list is because from like 2014, 2015, you could have 2016 in there.
Sure.
I do think that is one of the best wing defenders ever, and I do think it is the best wing defender of the last 25 years. And I still do value just when teams are actively putting their best players away from the action because Kawhi's guarding them. He may not be the most active away from the ball, but you've taken the best player out of the game. That's valuable. You're now playing 4-on-4 without the best offensive player on the floor. For all intents and purposes. So that all of those things factored in, I did have Kawhi Leonard on my list, but I do think the top 5 was reserved for the elite of the elite, rim protectors, versatile defenders. So I wouldn't be able to get him in the top 5, but I do think 6 through 10 is a fair range for Kawhi. I also think not having him on the list is fair, especially when you do just value just peaks. So John D has Kawhi at 5, and Sean had Kawhi at 7, and Tyler had Kawhi off the list, which means Tyler, we need your number 7.
Yeah, my number 7 goes right in with the Gobert discussion. I mentioned that there was a couple guys from the era that I think give you more schematic flexibility in the playoffs. So my 7 was Giannis. And I think Giannis peaked as a regular season defender in 1920-ish. But I think his actual peak as a defender in the playoffs came 21-22. Yeah. And I think it was in 19, he exploded as like this unreal weak side defender. Like, I'm going to roam off the corner and I'm going to blow up everything in the pick and roll. I'm going to tag every drive. I'm going to switch onto the ball when needed. Just this ultra versatile 4. And then by 21, it was like, okay, now I'm also going to be an elite drop defender. That came out of nowhere. Like when Giannis was playing drop in the finals against Phoenix, that's when I knew it was like, okay, this guy's an unreal defender. And then I think he got even better in 22. So with Giannis, you have like, check the boxes. You have a guy who can switch. I think he's a pretty overrated switch defender, actually. Like, people say 1 through 5 with Giannis. I don't see it. But
I think he could a few years ago, but definitely not now. Like 2017, 2018, I think Giannis could do that. But now I don't think he has that capability.
So Giannis still, even if he can't 1 through 5, like still very, very switchable. Like, you feel good about him on 2 through 5 at the very least. And then occasionally guarding 1s. I think that's a big deal because now you unlocked, like, we can throw this guy on anyone and not have to worry about like a breakdown. Then you have the low man stuff. I'm going to roam off the corner. I'm going to blow up lobs. I'm going to grab 14 rebounds a game cleaning up. I'm going to allow Brook Lopez to play drop because you can't get the lob past me. So I think that matters. Then you have like the other variable where it's like, yeah, now I can play the small ball 5. I can drop, I can hedge, I can switch. I can do whatever you need me to do. That was their like chess piece in the finals against Phoenix. They started playing Giannis at the 5. And then he had the greatest block I've ever seen in my life to blow up a lob. And so, yeah, to me, Giannis in like 2021, 2022 was pretty much like the ultimate defensive chess piece in terms of what you can do with him. And I actually think his defense has slipped a lot since then. Like, I think that kind of gets overlooked. I think there was like a very clear peak like 3-4 years ago. But the one thing that holds me back from just outright putting him in like a top 4 conversation is I think of those like guys coming up next, Giannis is probably, I don't want to say he's bad at awareness, but like doesn't process the game like a supercomputer, like some of these other like top 4 guys. Like, I think there are times where he misses rotations and also plays off. He takes a lot of plays off, and a lot of that has to do with the offensive load. But yeah, to me, like, ultimate defensive chess piece in the playoffs. The Bucks actually from 2019 to 2021, actually to 2022, had the greatest 4-year playoff defense in NBA history. Like, they were a better playoff defense statistically than Bill Russell's Celtics, than the bad boy Pistons, than Ben Wallace's Pistons. Those Bucks teams statistically were the best playoff defense ever. And Giannis is at the forefront of that.
The Giannis block that you brought up in Game 6 of that Sun series is probably the most technically perfect block ever. Like
the way he was able to recover and just
he baited the pass. He
baited the pass, played drop
around.
Like, that's arguably the most technically perfect like block ever. Because I think I made a tweet about that block, comparing it to the LeBron chase down, and got hammered for that point. But like, okay, the Bron block maybe holds more values or like because of the stakes in the moment. 3-1 comeback, it's tied. Fast break layup and the recovery by Bron, but like technically perfect in a half court setting. It's arguably the Giannis block in Game 6.
Yeah, that was an amazing block. I think the point you made about Giannis becoming like someone who can play that small ball 5, the 2021 and beyond. That was when I committed to Giannis is going to be a full-time 5 sooner rather than later. At first, I thought he was just going to be a 4 because I didn't like him as like a anchor big. But then when he started showing that ability in those years, I committed to Brook Lopez is going to be obsolete sooner rather than later, and they're going to run Giannis as the full-time 5. I do think the defense has regressed since then, of course, but 19 to, well, even like, because Giannis has, someone said it in the chat, drink more water. It was going to be the point I was going to make. Like, Giannis has phases as a defender. Like, the younger Giannis was the more spry, on-ball perimeter defender, defensive playmaker on the outside, getting steals, deflections, and he was thinner, he was slimmer, so you could see he was moving better laterally. And then 18, 19, etc., he was this monstrous roamer who was just blowing up things on the back line. Wasn't like much of a switch defender, but also wasn't like a typical anchor big. And then you got the years following that where he became this like, I'm a big who can play backline but can also play pick and roll defense. I can play your 4-5 consistently and lead to elite defense. I think it's an underrated part of like Giannis's longevity as a defender. It's like he wasn't an elite All-NBA defender for 10 years, but he was a strong defender for like 6-7 years, which I think is something that does get dismissed quite a bit with Giannis. But I'm getting to the point where there's someone who either isn't on you guys' lists or is a lot higher than I would have him. And I don't know which one is more concerning to me. So unless anyone has anything to add on Giannis, I do want to know who.
I did want to throw one more Giannis number at you because this is one that always stuck with me because I was with you in like 1920 where I was like, I can't get Giannis to this best defender in the league level without him showing that he can really be an anchor. And by 2022, we actually had like a really big playoff sample. So I wanted to throw a number at you. Like I said, that 4-year playoff stretch from the Bucks, they were statistically the best defense ever. With Giannis and Brook on the floor together, they had a 105 defensive rating. With Giannis on the floor without Brook in over 700 minutes, they had a 103.4 defensive rating. So we're talking this team with Giannis at the 5, either at the 4 with Portis. I kind of think he's the 5 when Portis is out there because Portis is just kind of, I don't know what he's
just covering up for all the nonsense.
Yeah. And so to me, that signal right there it just hammers the point home. Like this defense is historically good when Giannis is your 5 or your 4. And you can kind of even use him as a 3 if you need him to guard a wing. So it's like, yeah, I just think going back, I had him one spot ahead of Gobert. I think Gobert had the higher regular season peak. But in terms of like, we're in round 3, we're in round 4 of the playoffs. What can you do? I just think Giannis is kind of like unschemable.
So you had Gobert 8, right?
Gobert was my 8. Giannis was my 7.
Okay.
Did you guys have Giannis on the list? I forgot to ask you guys.
I didn't.
An honorable mention.
Yeah.
Oh, neither of you have Giannis. Okay.
One of my first 3 off.
John, who do you have at number 6?
Got Anthony Davis at number 6. I think Anthony Davis, game-changing defensively. He was really good in space, in my opinion. He's a great rebounder. And something that I looked at, I think he was a complete monster in the 2023 playoffs. I think he was a top 2 defender in that playoff run. I think the way he was able to be a mismatch for the Golden State Warriors and completely shut off things at the rim for Memphis and Golden State, and to be a rebounder, to play the pick and roll so well. He's extremely disciplined. I really like what Anthony Davis does, man. I really like what Anthony Davis does. And they didn't necessarily have the best defense around Anthony Davis. He covered up for a lot in those series. Like LeBron wasn't the best defender in that run. Austin Reeves was getting really big minutes. He wasn't the best defender. Roy Hachimura wasn't a great defender, and he covered up for a lot of those things.
We don't talk about Rudy. We don't talk about Rudy.
And another one who I can promise isn't on this list.
Especially like since the Lakers love to run a lot of 3-guard lineups in those playoff runs, and they were it felt like the Lakers didn't really show how undersized they were until they went against the Nuggets. And I feel like AD was a really big factor in that. People were thinking like, oh, this team was a decent size, but they had a lot of guys on the floor that were like 6'4" and under. And Anthony Davis really he really made up for that. He really protected the rim well, kept the rebounding game close. He was so dominant inside as a defensive rebounder, just being a rim deterrent. So I had him at number 6.
Sean and I talk about this all the time with like AD being the ideal half-court defender. It's like in the pick and roll, you can do every coverage exceptionally well. You can switch exceptionally well, like switching on to Steph in those playoff games and shutting him down in isolation. Elite rebounder, elite rim protector, elite shot blocker, elite like hands too. He does the Bill Russell contest where you get one hand up, one hand down to take away the pass and the shot at the rim. Like, bro, there's nothing he can't do. But to me, he's the guy on this list, even of anyone I considered out of my 37, who probably has the most concerning motor, where it's like, it's kind of like maybe actually besides Shaq, besides Shaq, AD's motor is really inconsistent, especially like just a bad transition defender. Doesn't get back.
Egregious transition.
Even in the playoffs, like Jokic consistently beat him down the floor time and time again. Yeah. That is a problem because that bleeds a lot of value. Like that. And so AD was also my number 6. And I'm kind of just talking about why he's not in my top 4. It's like, I think in the regular season, he's by far a weaker defender than Gobert, for example. And it's just because like inconsistency. I think in the playoffs, ideal half-court defender, has some of the transition issues. I think his peak was probably the bubble, but 2023 is also right there. And then like a Pelicans year, 2018, like 2018 to 2023 kind of. And he's probably still like kind of what Sean said with Gobert. No one would say he's not like a top 5 to 6 defender on the planet still. And it's just like, he just gives you that much versatility. I think he kind of is hurt by the fact that the Lakers never made an effort to like put him in some like really tough defensive lineups. It's always like him with 2 guards who can't contain dribble.
Don't save us, AD.
It's like, it's annoying. I think it's kind of like the AD thing is kind of like the Bam thing I talked about, where Bam consistently makes these defenses look way better than they are. AD does that on an even more extreme level because he doesn't have a Jimmy Butler. He doesn't have an Eric Spoelstra. So, yeah, I just think AD, such an awesome defender.
Sean, where did you have AD? Or did you not have him? I don't want to assume.
I did. I had 85. And I was honestly going back and forth between AD and Rudy for me for 5 and 6. I completely like understand the placement. I think this is perfect. I think AD is not in that top 4. It's a pretty clear top 4 for me. But he's like right here in this middle tier. And it's the biggest separator between him and Rudy is because like in an ideal situation, like Tyler was mentioning, you can do any coverage in the book. You can basically just do anything you want in the half court with Anthony Davis because he has the versatility that Rudy doesn't always provide for you, while still being in a half court setting in a playoff scenario, being a elite drop big. And kind of like Tyler was alluded to, I'm glad he mentioned it, with like AD being able to perfectly play the shot and like make sure that you don't get the pass off with the one hand up, one hand down. He does that better than maybe anybody in the league. And Rudy, I think, is probably the best drop big in the league. But in terms of simply playing 2 in a drop, AD is arguably the best in the league at that. And honestly, the biggest reason why I did not have AD in the top 4 is because of just how bad he is in transition / like the motor stuff that we already talked about. That's the biggest like drawback from pushing him any further into the top 4, even definitively having him at 5. Like I said, I was going back and forth with him and Gobert the whole time. So that means I even like had him at 6 for a period of time. So it's the motors, it's the transition defense, and then it's the regular season, the ceiling or the floor even isn't as high as like the top 4 for me.
Yeah, I think if basketball was a game where after each possession you just had to stop play and then go into the half court, I think AD would probably be my number 1. Like, and I don't think that's me over exaggerating. I genuinely think he might be the best half court defensive player, and maybe some of that is because I'm not factoring in error and I'm just factoring the overall skill set and what he's capable of doing. Mm-hmm. But you guys have all said it. There's nothing he can't do at an elite level for a big in the half court. The concerns obviously are the motor, and I think transition is something that is I don't understand why he's
so weird.
It's so aggravating. It
doesn't make sense.
As a
Lakers fan, I'll never understand it. But like, I remember I was talking and people were saying, "Oh, the plan for the Lakers against the Nuggets should be AD is going to run Jokic up and down. And I was just there like the exact opposite is going to happen. Jokic is going to run AD up and down, but for some reason, people just don't expect that to happen, and it happens every time. So that's my only gripe with Anthony Davis is, well, only major gripe with Anthony Davis is the transition stuff. But in the half court, I have really no concerns, if I'm being honest. He's just extremely talented defensively. I was surprised to hear AD at 6. I thought he was going to be a quite unanimous top number 5, but you are the only one who doesn't have a number 5 yet, Tyler. So it's right back onto you. Who do you have at number 5?
My number 5, it popped in my head when you mentioned if Rudy Gobert played 13 years ago, played in the early 2010s, he'd be like way up there. That's kind of how I feel about Dwight Howard. Dwight Howard is kind of like that era's Rudy Gobert. He was a lot smaller. Like Dwight Howard actually remember when the NBA cracked down on heights and Dwight Howard went from 6'11" to 6'9"? I don't know if that made it more or less impressive what he was doing. Cause like, he was shutting down the paint from every team in the playoffs. Like the Magic were consistently just such an elite playoff defense, and they had guys. Don't get me wrong, they had guys. But like, yeah, Dwight, super just active rim protector, mega shot blocker, the best, like probably top 3 rebounder of the century. Like just absurd rebounder. Pretty mobile, like could cover all bases, and that was in an era where mobility wasn't as needed. You didn't need to step up to the pick and roll. You didn't need to switch. I think the one concern with Dwight that just holds me back from having him in like the next tier is block chaser, really bad block chaser, and would block shots emphatically out of bounds for the highlight. And I think that's like something that, like when you see Dwight get a huge block into the crowd, that's such an exciting thing, but that actually does nothing for the defense because they just get possession back. So it's like, when you look at Wemby consistently blocks defenses or blocks shots into live balls for his team to recover. I think Bill Russell's like the king of that. Like, I'm going to block it intentionally to my teammate. Dwight was like, I'm going to swat this thing 50 rows up, and it has like its benefits and its drawbacks. Because the benefit is now the offensive player doesn't want to go in the paint.
The psychological warfare.
It's like the psychological warfare, like you mentioned with Mutombo. But the downside is that block actually doesn't do anything for the defense.
Yeah, Dwight is the one I struggle with the most because, like,
same.
Dwight Howard, like, you can on film is that the block chasing is a real thing, and from 2008 to 2011, he was top 2 in the league in goaltends every year, and he was number 1 3 of those years, and the only person who finished above him was Samuel Dalembert and JaVale McGee. So you look at the company he's in, it starts to add up as like, okay, this is concerning. Samuel Dalembert was also routinely just second in the league in goaltends behind Dwight Howard. So shout out to Dalembert. But like just the overall block chasing and the discipline is something that just threw me off a bit with Dwight in terms of how good of a defender he was. But then like I couldn't just dismiss the results, and the results was elite defenses in the regular season and the postseason with mediocre personnel at best. Sure. So like even though I do think fundamentally he was flawed, and I said Wemby was either the most or second most error prone defender on the list, is because Dwight Howard I think is the only other one who's in that conversation in terms of the amount of errors they commit. But he was just such a imposing force physically. The athleticism was off the charts, his ability to get off the ground. The most explosive leaper on this list. I think that's I don't even think that's a question.
I was gonna say like the only one that could be rivaled is like prime David Robinson. Like
yeah.
Dwight just had this
not 2000 David Robinson.
Yeah.
He was just. It was just I struggled with the discipline part of it, so I didn't know whether or not I was too high or too low on Dwight. But hearing you have him at 5, John and Sean, do you have him in the top 4? Or do you not have him on the list?
He did not make my list. I think we had this conversation a few days ago. I really value the discipline of a defensive player. That's just something I value a lot more. And once again, I think my from 7 up, or not even, I think the only player that I don't have on this list that was really undisciplined as a defender so far was Wemby, just by him being a little bit too aggressive around the paint and him just trying to play out to the perimeter just a little bit too much. But once again, I see like the physical tools that he does have that made me lean his way just a little bit to where if Dwight is getting these blocks, and I do get where it does lead, but if he's giving the offense consistently another chance to score or just giving them points by goaltending and being a little bit too aggressive on those blocks, it's something that drew me off. He was a very tough cut. Like I've had him at number 8 and number 7 on this list, but he just made it out for me.
Did I give you my number 8? I think I like confused myself. Did I give you my number 8?
Unless I wrote it down wrong, you said David Robinson was your 8.
Okay, that's weird. I messed something up because on my initial draft, I'm like looking at right now, he's 7, Kawhi's 8, and like Shaq's not even there. David Robinson's 9.
Oh,
so I completely messed up my list.
Okay. So do you want me to remove someone?
Yes. So like on my initial list, it's Wemby 10, it's Kawhi 9, it's David Robinson 8, it's Dwight 7.
Okay, because that's why I was confused because I was hearing there's a unanimous top four, and then we got to 5 and Dwight hadn't been said, and I was like, there's no way they have Dwight top 4.
What's so funny is Sean had like a reaction when John said that he didn't have Dwight on his list. And I was like, Sean, I don't think you have Dwight on your list.
I was like, Sean, what are you reacting for then?
I was confused, but okay, that covers it. So just to clarify,
mistake.
I've got everyone's 10 through 5, and then we're gonna do the top 4 after I get through some super chats. But John D, at 10 you have Wemby, at 9 you have Dikembe, at 8 you have Shaq, at 7 you have Rudy Gobert, at 6 you have Anthony Davis, and at 5 you have Kawhi. Is that correct?
Yes.
Sean, at 10 you have Wemby, at 9 you have Kawhi, at 8 you have David Robinson, at 7 you have Dwight Howard, at 6 you have Rudy Gobert, and at 5 you have Anthony Davis.
Yes, we got the correct list now.
Okay, there we go. And Tyler, at 10 you have Dikembe, at 9 you have David Robinson, at 8 you have Rudy Gobert, at 7 you have Giannis, at 6 you have Anthony Davis, and at 5 you have Dwight Howard. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I am keeping track of things very well. And before we get into the top 4, we do have a couple super chats. Shout out to everyone who sends super chats. Also shout out to everyone who likes the video. Apparently it helps the video do better in the algorithm. That's what I've been taught by the content creators around me. So please like the video if you did enjoy it, and if you didn't enjoy it, still like it. It's free. Antoine L host Ron said, do people still think the media likes Luka? Do the media like Luka?
I think a lot of things haven't went his way in the past couple of months. Just the highlight reels on him on defense, which don't really show like, because I think the highlights make him look a lot worse than what he actually is. I'm not saying he's a good defender, but I think the highlights does make him look a lot worse than what he is. A lot of people look at him complaining to the refs. Game 3 of the NBA Finals was not the best look for that. Yeah, it's just a lot of things that he does do for the media not to like him. I still like Luka. I still love watching him, but for the random, he complains too much, he's a crybaby, he doesn't play defense, those type of NBA fans, I could see them not liking Luka.
I think Luka's the biggest victim of being too good too early. Like, because he was an MVP level player in year 2, everyone expected him to like become like this GOAT 4 years in. When there wasn't really that many reasonable pathways to improving. Like, he already was, obviously he didn't peak in 2020, but he was already like, that's what Luka was going to be. There weren't many more pathways for him to improve. So he's like gotten better on the margins. And I think now, probably last year was the best he's ever been as a basketball player. But it's like, people just got bored of it. We've seen like the same stuff for like 6 years. So like you said, I still love watching Luka because I love like the basketball supercomputer aspect of his game where it's like, you do this, I'm going to do this. But like, to the average fan, it's like, we've already seen this for 6 years. Like, what else? Like, it just kind of got old. I think that's what happens with every player that's that good that early.
I think to that point, Luka's maybe, dare I say, starting to get a little underrated, because I think you're starting to see more and more like top 5 lists starting to leave Luka off. And okay, maybe not have like the hottest start, like first 4 games of the year, but the amount of times I've seen a top 4 or top 5 list, like, I love Jason Tatum, but include Jason Tatum or like Shea clearly over Luka already. I'm like, guys, Luka Doncic last season was the best on-ball player in the entire league. Jokic is the best player in the league. Luka, in terms of having the ball in his hands 100 times a night or whatever, was the best on-ball player in the league. Took the Mavs to the finals, like Tyler said. That's easily like his best year of his career.
Minnesota series, bro.
Bro,
that Minnesota series was crazy.
Like, just
crazy.
Picked apart the best defense in the league,
and it was,
or the second
best
defense in the league.
He was clearly like battling the whatever. I don't even remember
the
what
knee
the injury
thing
was. Yeah,
like
it was a knee injury.
And he was kind of like off and on in the Clippers and Thunder series, and then he goes up against this like all-time level defense that just Jokic like human, and then just like I don't even know how to describe what that series was, but I've never seen a series like that. Like, you'd have to go back to probably like 2018 LeBron to find a series where a guy makes the right decision. Like, the ball gets in his hand.
Which Bron series?
And there's
oh like God, anyone.
But like the ball got in Luka's hands, and you just knew he was going to make the right decision every single time. And it was like there was nothing Minnesota could do.
Luka made Jaden McDaniels look like the worst screen navigator I've ever seen.
Bro, I've never seen like somebody
putting him in jail. It was ridiculous.
Jaden's PR heading in that series was so great, and then after that series, you would think like Jay McDaniels was a below-average defender.
Kyle Anderson was the best Luka defender in that series.
Yeah, they were just.
Now he can't get PT on the Warriors, but that's a whole different conversation. It's weird because it seems like going further in the playoffs has seemed to damage Luka's rep because of the finals.
Yeah.
I don't think he was ever a great defender, but I also think last year was one of his better defensive seasons.
Yeah,
I just
they did a great job building around him.
For sure. I think the postseason wasn't great. And I think some of that's due to injuries. Some of that is the Boston series in particular. That's just a horrible matchup for someone like Luka, where you got to make second and third efforts consistently, and you've got to cover that much ground. I just don't think that's a series made for Luka, and it really hones in on his weaknesses. But when I start hearing people quote these blow-by stats, and it's like, no one had ever used blow-by stats a day in their life until Luka all of a sudden led in the stat. And then you ask someone who led in the stat before Luka did, and all of a sudden, no one knows the answer. Because you never used the stat before, but now all of a sudden, he's the worst defender ever. I'm like, okay, so we can see the agendas that are being pushed.
It's also a fundamental misunderstanding of what Dallas wanted to do in the playoffs. Most teams that use guard-to-guard screens, you'll see their weaker defenders hedge. And it's like, now you on the ball and you create an advantage. The Mavs said, no, we don't need to put two on the ball. We're going to switch Luka and Kyrie onto the ball every single time. And then we're just going to have we're either going to peel switch or we're going to just like crowd the nail. And it worked against the Clippers. Luka got blown by Harden and PG, but they couldn't create anything. There was no offense coming from it. Same thing against the Thunder. Luka was switching on to Shea, J-Dub. J-Dub couldn't even beat him off the dribble, by the way, if you remember in that series. Same thing against Minnesota. He's switching on to Anthony Edwards, switching on to Mike Conley, whatever. And it's only in the finals when he has to face both Tatum and Brown with 5 out spacing. Yes, that's going to be tough to cover for. That's the only team that can do that.
Yeah, it was a tough matchup, and that's anyone who thought Dallas was going to win that series.
I
think it was
mad.
Celtics hate. Like,
it was making me so mad.
There was no logical way that Dallas was going to win that series. Besides Boston Celtics collapse.
They used to turn their cameras on and try and convince me that the Mavericks were going to win that series, and it's like I know what you're trying to do. I know you don't like Boston, but it's like
and you know what's so funny about that? I bet the pathway to the Mavs winning was like, if Tatum and Brown both go cold, they did.
They went cold.
There was no avenue to winning, and then Boston won. It's like, well, they had no comps. It's like, okay,
same thing that happened with the Nuggets. Same thing that happened with the Nuggets.
Yeah,
they were going to lose to the Lakers. They're going to lose to the Suns.
Tyler's the Jokic.
You played a bunch of playing teams.
They're going to put Jokic in pick and roll 70 times a game.
Wait, okay. Now that you bring that up, like, can we? Okay, this year's maybe a little bit different because Denver's defense is actually pretty bad this year. But can we acknowledge that for the past 2 years, especially in the playoffs, that Jokic was actually like a perfectly fine defender, and he is a perfectly fine defender in the playoff setting.
Yeah, he's in my top 4 coming up. So
yeah, I mean, have you seen the defensive box plus minus?
Hey,
but in the
top 10 all time, 2023.
Denver have done a good job schematically in terms of what they do for Jokic, especially in the playoff setting. I don't paint him as like anything more than a slight positive in my opinion.
Agreed.
I think at his best, he's a slight positive. At his worst, he's a clear negative, in my opinion. And I think this regular season, I think he's been a negative, in my opinion. I haven't liked what I've seen from Jokic defensively. But I still think
agreeing with Jokic hate.
It's fair.
Tyler's
I mean,
agreeing with
as long as you acknowledge that this is the best offensive season ever, I don't care what you think about his defense.
Yeah, you get lucky shooting 47% from three. That happens. That's cool. But like, yeah, I think generally speaking, I think Jokic can be a piece to a good play of defense, and he's shown that.
Yeah.
But I do think you are limited in terms of what you can do schematically with him, which is obviously why he's not on this list, but also why I don't paint him as anything more than he can be a slight positive just because of the schematic limitations with him. But final super chat, and then we get back to the list. Tito El Bandito asked a question about Cooper Flagg. He said, in your opinion, which team ruins Cooper Flagg if they get the number 1 pick, and what team would help him the best? Instead of ruins, I'll just ask you guys, what team do you want to see Cooper Flagg on next year?
I want to see him in Washington. I want to see him in Washington. I think
New Orleans.
Alex Sarr and Bilal can really build a top tier defense in the future. I really like what Bilal's done defensively, really like what Alex Sarr has done defensively. Now you pair that with the intensity of Cooper Flagg. Once again, I'm going to say this again because a lot of people think I'm crazy. I've been on record saying Cooper Flagg reminds me of Kevin Garnett a lot. So I think with that intensity that he's going to bring at such a young age, him being a help side rim protector, his length, his on-ball defense shows a lot of signs. I don't think he's there just yet, but I think Cooper Flagg's going to be really good. I would love to see him in Washington.
Chet is not very appreciative.
Yeah, they're not respectful.
Yeah, I mean,
you picked the worst team in the league, so it's like, how dare you? But
well, okay. Well, actually, to that point, though, the initial question was which team could ruin. I think when you're that good of a prospect, there's no ruining. It's just like who's going to put together the best.
Yeah, I don't like what Utah's got going on, but even then, I don't think they could ruin him. But I really don't like what Utah.
Isn't there a pathway where OKC gets him off of Philly's pick, or is that protected?
I think it's top 6 protected.
Top
protected.
Thank God.
But I will say, as a Rockets fan, we are preying on Phoenix's downfall right now.
I think my pick would be okay. So I'm looking at it now because I don't really know what everyone's pick situation is. I see Golden State, it looks like a possibility, right? If they're that bad, I think I don't know. I wish Chicago had their pick because that would be my pick. I would love to see him in Chicago.
I live in Chicago.
That's my hometown team. That's my hometown team. So I would love to see. I'd love to see him in Chicago. But I think of the teams that actually have a realistic possibility of getting him, Washington's a good one because we were actually just talking about this on our podcast with like the way they're coming together with Bilal, Alex Sarr. I think like getting either Flagg or Harper is like what pushes them into like we have a clear direction now. But the main one for me is the Pelicans. We talked about that too. Sean and I talked about Flagg and Zion. Start fresh. Like get Zion healthy. You have Flagg, Trey Murphy, Herb Jones. That team is terrifying. So that'd be the one for me, the Pelicans.
Yeah.
I'll be not biased. So the answer is Houston through Phoenix's pick. But I alluded to it earlier. Flagg on Wemby will be amazing. I want to see.
Yeah, that would be really good.
Wouldn't be fair,
that
man.
would be great. I think what Jordy Fernandez has going on in Brooklyn is intriguing, and I think building with Cooper Flagg could be something very interesting. I also think LaMelo, Brandon Miller, and Cooper Flagg is a great three-piece build. With Mark Williams, let me not forget Mark Williams, is a great core four to build with. If I'm being honest, anywhere but Utah. Like, if I'm being honest, anywhere.
What about Portland? I thought about Portland too. That'd be fun.
I would like
Klingon,
Shaden Sharp,
Tamani Kamara, Shaden Sharp, and Cooper Flagg would be amazing.
It's good out of Portland.
But I am hoping Portland gets Dylan Harper. That's what I think would be great for them. Because no disrespect, but Scoot Henderson is not Scoot Hendersoning right now. So give up on that experiment. But anywhere but Utah. That's my answer. Anywhere but Utah. It would be great for Cooper. And I think Sean, you said New Orleans as well.
Yeah, New Orleans.
Okay.
Yeah.
But anyway, a level of talent like Cooper, I don't think you ruin him. I think he's going to be really good. It's just where can he be at his best, and where helps him the most. But enough of Cooper Flagg, who may actually be on this list if we do this list 15 years from now, with how good he can be defensively. But we are on to the top four, the big four, as it's been said. Apparently, these guys are all a tier above the rest. And I'm going to start with Sean. Who do you have at number 4?
Of course, you start with me. All right. I want to say this. I think I think 3 and 4. I'm not gonna say it's like a tier gap in between 3 and 2, but I do think I feel much better about like my 1 or 2 being number 1 than I would 3 and 4 being number 1, if that makes sense. Although
Yes.
I would still have them within the same tier. I don't know, weird wording on my part. Number 4 for me, I have Ben Wallace 4. I have Ben Wallace at 4. One of, I mean, clearly the best defensive players of all time. Great shot blocker. Really the anchor of those mid-2000s defenses. Like Chauncey gets a lot of praise, I think, for those Detroit Pistons teams, to not take it away from Chauncey. But without Ben Wallace, that team is not win an NBA championship. I think we can like agree with that. Like all-time level of defender, insane like motor, like consistently, something you really never had to worry about with Ben Wallace. I have him and I almost spoiled my number 3, but him and my number 3, I was going back and forth the entire time, and I kind of solidified it here while we were, talking about the super chats. But yeah, Ben Wallace for me is number 4.
I have Ben Wallace at number 4 as well, and I think his post defense was really underrated. Also, throughout a 4-year span, he led the league in rebounds, and I think it was at about 13 and a half a game throughout those 4 years. So I think standing at 6'9" as well, he was such a great rebounder, such a great shot blocker, great post defender. I think he did really good in the pick and roll. So, and you alluded to this as well, just having that motor game in and game out to where he's going to give his all defensively and be the forefront of this defense, that's extremely valuable as well. So I think having somebody that is going to be guarding you and is going to consistently outwork you and outplay you is really intriguing.
Ben Wallace was my number 2. He was my number 2.
Okay.
Ben, I'm very high on Ben Wallace. I think I don't even know where to start. I think, first of all, people overlook the fact that he was 6'7", 6'8". So he wasn't like this big presence, but he had actually, I totally forgot about him when we talked about.
He might be the most explosive.
I was just going to say that when we talked about the Dwight leaping, Ben Wallace skipped my mind. Like if you watch Ben Wallace 2-foot leap off the floor, no dip in the legs at all, just explode up to the rim. Absurd, man. Ben Wallace's vertical pop was insane. He also had freakishly long arms. He was ridiculously strong with that center of gravity that allowed him to like match up with forwards or bigs in a way that a lot of these other guys couldn't and get pushed around. I think Ben Wallace benefited a lot from the fact that the Pistons during that time probably had the most versatile front court ever. The Ben Sheed, Tayshaun Prince, like 3-headed, we can all switch everyone, cover everything, rangy. I think he benefits a lot from that, and it probably makes his impact numbers look a little bit better than they otherwise would be. But those impact numbers are like GOAT tier, like the plus minus stuff. It's absurd. I think all-time shot blocker, great hands, could get hands on the ball and in passing lanes and stuff like that, could switch pretty much across the board in an era where that was more of a luxury than it otherwise would be. The big thing that hammers the point home for me is, one, the Pistons during that like 5-year run or whatever were just like at worst a top 5 defensive stretch of all time as a team. Like regular season, playoffs, versatility, there was nothing you could do to take them out of their comfort zone. Then in 2007, Ben Wallace joins the Bulls.
Best defense in the league.
The best defense in the league, and it was not even the same Ben Wallace. And it was like, okay, that clearly proved to us that you were the head of the snake. Like you were the guy that pulled it all together. And yeah, so my thing is like, you look at any signal, right? Like team defense, you look at like how the team performed with and without a guy. You split up the lineup data. Like Ben Wallace just passes every test with flying colors. And then in an era where, yes, rim protection and size was the most valuable thing, he gave you that and more. He gave you so much more that the Pistons rode the backs of and then just like did whatever they wanted. Like they could trap. They were like, they would always trap the ball. And it's like, you can do that because you have a 6'7" guy behind the play that's going to cover everything. And yeah, so I think Ben Wallace is just like, I think 1 through 4, they all have a claim for number 1, and it's just splitting hairs. But Ben Wallace, to me, gets the edge. I had him at number 2.
I think the thing that impresses me the most about Ben Wallace is part of it is winning bias, but part of it is just he was so dominating defensively. He escaped the stigma that comes with being a great defensive player while being the worst offensive player I've ever seen. Rudy Gobert has not escaped it. He gets, in my opinion, he gets criticized more on defense because of how bad his offense is. Ben Wallace doesn't deal with that. And he was a nightmarish offensive player. But defensively, I think you alluded to it. The ability that he had in an era that didn't call for it, but when he needed to, he could, and he was really good at it to switch and guards in space, and like he's ripping guards in the open court, like he's ripping them, and he's taking it coast to coast, and it looks terrible while he does it, but he does it. But like I do think there's a trade-off there. Sometimes I do think he was a bit over aggressive, like in terms of pick and rolls. Like sometimes he'll step out and try and like blitz a ball handler, and he'll end up giving up a roll and stuff. But then that's what you deal with Rasheed Wallace sliding over, and now he's protecting the rim. But that's the 04 Pistons were a ridiculous defense. But I think similar to what you said, the thing that really hammered it home was what he did in 07 in Chicago. Turning that, and that's not just the best defense in the league, that's one of the best defensive regular seasons like ever, in terms of how good that Chicago defense was, and Ben Wallace is at the forefront of that. And I think as a pure rim protector, he was elite. As a defensive rebounder, he was elite. In terms of versatility schematically and in terms of switchability, he was the best in the league or second best in the league at the time.
Never fouled. Never fouled.
There was no defensive issue with Ben Wallace. Like he's playing heavy minutes in the regular season and playoffs, 40 minutes a game, and he's fouling like twice. Yeah, like he doesn't do anything wrong. Like
listen to this. In the 2003 playoffs, the Pistons played 17 games. Ben Wallace averaged 16 rebounds, 2.5 steals, and 3 blocks with 2.9 fouls. Like, bro, what is that stat line?
He's a ridiculous.
And the motor, dude, the motor, like you mentioned, the motor, bro, like, and the intimidation.
To be fair, he had no choice but to have a 100% motor on defense. He had no choice.
We didn't even talk about the intimidation factor, though. Like, Ben Wallace was terrifying for opposing offensive players. He was so scary.
He was wearing headbands on his arms. He was, Ben Wallace was a ridiculous defender. I can definitely see the case for number 2. I think you actually made a really compelling case for number 2.
Yes, you did.
Where's Ben for you?
I would have him at 3. Have him at 3.
Okay.
But I think Tyler did a good job of maybe talking me into number 2, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna stick to my guns and say number 3. But I'm gonna ask John D, who do you have at number 3? That's what I'm gonna ask.
I got Draymond Green at number 3. I think Draymond is one of the smartest defenders the league has ever seen, with his play recognition and just being able to anchor a defense and also make sure everyone around him is in the best spot to succeed on a night in, night out basis, and just being excellent on the perimeter and guarding the post really well at 6'6", 6'7", and also being able to guard out in space. I just think all of that stuff is extremely valuable. The play recognition, a lot of stuff that he does off the ball, you never really see on the box score, whether it's him just disrupting someone dribbling in passing lanes and then helping a guy that's guarding him one-on-one get the steal, or taking charges, or just being able to be effective night in and night out on any part of the floor consistently, and just like uplifting this defense a lot more to be a better defense than what you would really think. And Draymond Green did all of that at like 6'6" or 6'7", guarding the post, playing out in space, playing passing lanes. I think his IQ is amazing as well. So I had him at 3.
Highest defensive IQ ever.
I was gonna say Draymond was my 4. And I think he's the smartest defender ever. It kind of hurts because, like you said, Gobert is your litmus test guy. That's me with Draymond. It's like, how do you feel about Draymond? Let's find out what we're talking about here. I think he's the smartest defender ever. I think he's the hardest defender ever to probably scheme. Like, he is the game within the game. He embodies that. It's like, no matter what you do, like we talk about the Luka stuff, like where I talked about, like, you do this, I'm gonna do this, basketball supercomputer. Draymond is the defensive version of that. It's like whatever the offense tries to do, he's gonna recognize it and blow it up. He's always in the right spot at the right time. He also unlocked the versatility for the Warriors with the small ball 5 stuff. I think there's one thing that holds, like I said, I have to split hairs. I think Draymond checks every box except for the fact that of this group of 4, he's the only one that I don't think could be a full-time 5 for a 4-round playoff run. I think, like, you need that other guy, like that Boga, that JaVale McGee, that Kevon Looney. You need that other guy in it to help him with rebounding and to help him with rim protection. And I think that's just the one hang up. But besides that, checks every box. Just absurd defender.
Yeah, you might have swung me on Ben Wallace being a little higher on my list.
Yeah, Ben Wallace and Draymond was the confliction for me. I didn't know.
And that's the thing for me. They have similar body styles. Ben Wallace is a little bit taller, but Ben Wallace is so much more explosive and so much of a better rebounder that you just get that full-time 5 stuff.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like you said, that was definitely the confliction. I had Draymond 3, and like I said, like I had them like back and forth the entire time, and like Tyler having his great point about Ben Wallace, like didn't make it any easier.
Okay.
But like, look, man, Draymond Green is like the smartest defensive player of all time.
Yeah.
Where any action he can blow up, and it doesn't matter. So like if you're a quarterback in football, like you have to have your pre-snap read. Like before you hike the ball, you have to have your pre-snap read, and then you have your post-snap read. Like after the ball is hiked, 2 different reads. Draymond Green is the best example of like an elite NFL quarterback, but put on a basketball floor where I know exactly what's about to happen before you even start running, organizing your set or running your offense. And then once it happens, I'm already there 2 steps ahead of you. Then if you try to like neutralize and skip the ball out or do anything like that, Draymond's recovery speed in terms of closing out, but also being able to defend and contain the drive still at the same time is generational. I don't know if he gets credit for his rim protection enough. I think he's like perfectly like fine compared to the rest of this guys here. I think it's pretty easy to say he's the worst rim protector out of these top 4, but I don't say that like in a disparaging way. Like he is a very, very capable rim protector, especially in playoff settings where you see an uptick in rim protect in shot blocking production and things of that nature. The argument for Draymond is undersized dude, but supercomputer processing, and just I said Bam was the king of versatility over the past so many years. Draymond Green is the actual king. Like he is the best, most versatile defender of the past 15 years, ever since his prime started, basically. And
I think. Sorry, I go ahead. Go ahead. I don't want to cut you off.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, I kind of want to go against my own argument for a second and mention like what he lacks in rim protection, he so much makes up for in versatility because I think there were things you could do with Draymond that you couldn't do with any. Actually, there's one other guy you could do him with that we haven't gotten to yet. But there were things you could do with Draymond that you can't do with any other defender from this era. And it's like people forget that there was a playoff series in Portland where he was the primary defender on Damian Lillard. He was the primary defender on Lillard. And it's like, this is our defensive anchor going out and guarding Damian Lillard. And then you have him guarding Jokic just a few years later and like doing a good job on Jokic. And it's like, Draymond's versatility. Also, another thing that's underrated, most of these guys elevate their team's defense by cleaning up their mistakes. Like you look at like Ben Wallace, for example. If Billups gets beat on the perimeter, Wallace is going to be there to protect the rim. Draymond being one of, if not the loudest communicator ever is such a big deal because he squeezes the best possible defense out of everyone on the court. Like the way Wiggins completely transformed as a defender and the way he like ingrained in Steph. Like Steph has like the supercomputer defensive technique down as a help defender because he's spent his entire career with Draymond. So it's like Draymond elevates his defensive players in a way that probably only one other guy does in this list.
Yeah, Draymond is I was struggling. Everyone in my top 4 I played with up to number 1. Like I didn't know where I was going to go with it. But the thing that impressed me the most, and this is something like I was doing research for this, in the years preceding Kevin Durant and then with Kevin Durant, like all included, every lineup with Draymond Green in the postseason was an elite defensive unit. Every lineup without him was egregiously bad on defense. And I didn't know this. Like Draymond, Clay, and Steph, and this is 1,400 minutes from 15 to 19, a 104 defensive rating. Draymond and Clay, 102. Draymond and Steph, 103. Like you do Draymond and KD, it was somehow 87. But very small sample of those two, but 87. But like, and then every lineup without Draymond Green, it was bad. Like I'll read you the numbers for anyone who's interested. The numbers with KD, Steph without Draymond on the floor, 109. Steph and KD without Draymond, 117. Clay and Steph without Draymond, 110. Clay, Steph, and KD without Draymond, 115. Like, whatever lineup assortment you have without Draymond Green, they're not an elite defense. You put Draymond on there, they're one of the best playoff defenses we've seen. And
his
that's
longevity
just
too.
Yeah.
Is like also kind of underrated.
He
Like
was the best defender in the league, in my opinion, in 2016. Then was the best defender in the league again in 2022.
Yeah.
Like, we're 7 years apart, and he's the best defender in the league in 2 separate years.
He's still probably top 10 again. Like, still, even though like Golden.
Yeah, the issue now with Draymond is sometimes he takes some plays off, and sometimes like he's too smart for me to think that he's like missing assignments. Like, so I just think he's taking plays off, but like you're seeing these errors start to rack up a bit more with Draymond. And the rim protection has fallen off a lot.
The thing for me with Draymond is like whenever it's a big game, he's right back to his prime self. Like that Dallas game, that was like peak Draymond.
Yeah.
Yeah, he could still, and if the Warriors make the playoffs again, I expect to see Draymond be an elite defender again. So he's still at that level. The only thing that's really tapered off is the consistent motor in the regular season and just in general, the rim protection. Now I think he needs a 5 next to him more than ever. I just think his individual rim protection has fallen off. But since we spoke about Draymond, now I'm convincing myself he's better than Ben Wallace. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. But we are getting into, well, we've got Tyler's number 2, but so actually, Tyler, who do you have at number 3? That's what.
Yeah, my number 3 is Tim Duncan. I think that Spurs, okay, if I considered longevity, he'd probably be number 1. That Spurs dynasty was like 20 years of elite defense. It just never slipped. And that was Duncan. I think the argument for actually the 2004 Spurs too, the year after David Robinson retired.
Regular season defense ever, I believe.
Yeah, the best regular season defense ever. And it was the year Robinson retired. I think Duncan's ability to switch between the 4 and 5 is underrated. I think it's also underrated that he came into the league as a 3. People don't remember that. Tim Duncan was a 3 in his rookie year, guarding perimeter players. So Duncan had versatility. To me, the argument for Duncan is really as simple as that's what Rudy Gobert would look like if he played in the constraints of the 2000s without having to cover all that space. Like perfectly disciplined, never makes errors, elite rebounder and shot blocker who can kind of switch when needed. I just think Duncan was like a pretty perfect defender in terms of just like discipline and execution with like the size and absurd length. And it was just so easy to build an elite defense around him.
Yeah, Tim Duncan, he led 14 top 3 defenses. Like, you're just not going to get that anywhere else. Like, I don't want to spoil it, but I value the longevity a lot. So
okay, I'll put him in at number 1 for you. Don't worry.
Yeah, appreciate that. But yeah, his timing when it came to blocking shots, like somebody could drive, pump fake. I'm not going anywhere. Now I know you're about to jump, so I'm about to block the shot. Perfect timing. Once again, you mentioned it with his versatility on the wing, the way he was able to use his feet to really put himself in the best position and flip his hips fast enough to where he can cut off a driving lane and force someone to take an uncomfortable shot. A lot of those things I was really high on, and he had points in his career where he was an elite help side defensive player, and that was his main focus. Elite post-up defensive player, and that was his main focus. He played out to the perimeter a lot. And if you're asking me, you're asking me to get a top 5 to top 7 defense for the span of 20 years or however long he played. I think it was 19 or 20 years. I would take that. I would take that 100% of the time because I think he was an all NBA team or all defensive team like in the last 2 or 3 years of his career. Like to be able to anchor an elite defense throughout your entire career, even in your last years at 36 or 37 years old, I value a lot. So if you're telling me with player A, you're going to get 20 years of elite defense and he's going to be at the forefront of it, I would take that. So that's why I had him at number 1.
Dude, he was on the all NBA team in his 18th season.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like he was ridiculous, man. He was ridiculous.
So I have Tim Duncan 2 on my list. But again, you're really splitting hairs with all 4 of these guys. I think obviously, like John mentioned, the longevity argument is one of, if not maybe the best argument you can make for Tim Duncan. Like, you don't even have to get to anything he does skill related on the defensive end of the floor. It's the fact that, 14 top 3 defenses over his career.
Top 3 defenses.
And the fact that he was still like an A level defender in his like last years, which by the way was barely not even a decade ago technically. Like it was 2016, his last year. Like to say that in your age 38 season, you're still an A-level defender because of your perfect technique and discipline, that's something that like holds a lot of gravity, in my opinion. I have to get this off. It's a miracle and maybe even a bit of a joke that arguably, like if you add in the entire, not even going to go that, one of the top three, I think consensusly top three defender of the 21st century, never winning a defensive player of the year is a joke.
It's a crime. It's a
so
crime.
stupid.
What's even worse is in a half of those years, Bruce Bowen, his own teammate, was finishing above him in the voting.
It's a crime. It's a crime.
and not to cut you off, maybe that's an argument that you go that is like can be made against Tim Duncan in his placement, is that he played for the beginning of his career next to David Robinson, and he did have just in general other great defensive talent around him. But at the end of the day, like he still was the anchor for consistently top three defenses. So yeah, Tim Duncan's my number two.
You know what's underrated about Duncan too is his block rate consists come playoff time. Like if you look at those like playoff numbers, he was a guy who would get like 2.5 blocks in the regular season, getting like 3 or 4 over like long playoff runs. Like in the 2002 playoffs, he averaged 4.3 blocks. And in the next year, 03 playoffs, the iconic run, 3.3 blocks with 15 rebounds.
Pick one Duncan playoff run.
Pick one? You're saying pick one Duncan playoff run?
Yeah.
03. It's
okay.
I was gonna say that's a given. That was
not necessary. Well, yeah, it is. I don't know.
What are you going with? 2014?
Hey, respect 2014. That was good boom. But like Tim Duncan was like the antithesis of Dwight Howard in terms of every mistake Dwight Howard made, all the goaltends he committed, Tim Duncan was just the opposite. We didn't explode off the ground, but we targeted the ball low. We didn't swat shots out of bounds, but we kept them in bounds and we just retained the ball.
Yeah.
We didn't jump on up fakes. We felt no need to because we're cooler than you and we don't need to jump. Like in 2003, in the regular season, Tim Duncan committed 2 goaltends. 2. And that's also a consistent thing throughout his career where he's not committing any goaltends. In the playoffs, it was 0. Not a single goaltend that Tim Duncan committed. And this is with him being one of the best shot blockers of all time. So I struggled with what to do with Tim Duncan. The longevity of it is something I favor over my number one. But then the versatility that he provides and the motor and the communication and all of those things are things that I think I value more peak for peak. I don't know what to do. I'm gonna be honest. As I've been hearing you guys go through your top 4, I'm changing my list like as you guys speak. Like I think recently I just moved Draymond back above Ben Wallace. Like my list is changing currently. So I know that Sean and Tyler have KG number 1, spoiler, and I know John D has Tim Duncan number 1. I don't have a decision, so I'm gonna just let them go through their KG stuff before I make my decision. But just before we do that on Tim Duncan, the offense regressed after like year 8, year 9, but defensively, you guys have alluded to it. He was an elite defender till the day he left. Even in 2016, he was one of the best rim protectors in the sport. So that level of 19, I think it is 19 years of elite all defensive level value, while also providing you all-time defensive player of the year level value, despite what the voting may say. Bruce Bowen having the most second place finishes of all time is disgusting.
Talk about 2007.
Right now, I'm on the Duncan side of the fence. I'll say that. But I want to give you guys the floor. I'll start with Sean. Why is KG number 1?
Kevin Garnett is number 1, honestly, for all the reasons I kind of was talking about Draymond for, honestly. But
except he's 6'11".
Except he's 6'11", except he's a far superior shot blocker. But in terms of the ability to diagnose things as it's happening, have near perfect help defense when needed, but also having some of the versatility and stuff just in a different era to where it maybe wasn't needed as much. Like he's 6'11" Draymond with like A+ rim protection, essentially. Like that's the argument. Tyler's like, is it your like Twitter handle KG is the GOAT?
Before I got suspended, it was KG's GOAT.
Right.
Yes. KG,
so I'll let you make the argument.
KG is my guy. I've watched more KG games than like any historic player. And my take is that he is elite shot blocking away from being just the best defender ever. Like that's literally there are two flaws. Well, I wouldn't even consider the rim protection a flaw, but like when we're splitting hairs, there are two things that Kevin Garnett isn't absolutely S tier at. It's shot blocking, and then it's like getting pushed around a little bit because he had a very lengthy frame.
Sure.
I'm of the belief that Kevin Garnett did the Kevin Durant thing to play a different position. I think Kevin Garnett was like 7'1". Like, I think when you look at him against other centers and stuff, like I think Kevin Garnett is clearly, he also had like what, a 7'10" wingspan. So we talked about Wemby having like the freakiest physical tools. The only other guy who I'd put in that conversation is Kevin Garnett. Freakishly long arms, the agility of a wing, 7'1", has the communication and mind of Draymond. I almost think of him as like a hybrid between Draymond and Wemby. And I think when people look at Kevin Garnett, they think of like the Celtics years. They think of some of the late Minnesota years maybe. And they're like, yeah, he was a good power forward defender. Like, he's a good weak side guy. He's a good rebounder. I think it gets overlooked just how versatile this guy was. Like, I think one game that really stood out to me when I was watching back in the day, I want to say it was the 1997 playoffs. So this is kind of like before the 21st century, but just plays into my point. I want to say it was 97. They faced Houston in the first round. And you know what Kevin Garnett's role was on defense? To full court press Clyde Drexler. That's what he was doing. And they were full court trapping Clyde Drexler. Then you get to like 2003. Everyone talks about the series where Dirk torched KG. KG was guarding Steve Nash for half of those games. Why is the 7'1" power forward guarding Steve Nash effectively? Like, Steve Nash was struggling to create anything. I think he is like the ultimate defensive chess piece in terms of like, I talked about it with Giannis kind of, but Kevin Garnett takes it all up to another notch. It's like he's going to switch. Not even the one wants to attack him on a switch, but then from the one, he's going to rotate across the court and block a shot at the rim or blow up an action. He's probably the rangiest athlete in NBA history in terms of like, I'm just going to teleport from the corner to the rim and I'm going to get there early because I have the Draymond sixth sense. So to me, it's basically just like, yeah, I admit that I'm definitely higher on KG than probably anyone in basketball history. But like, in terms of just, this guy was like, I'm especially thinking about him in this current era. Like, if you were to go into a lab and craft like the ideal perfect defender, you would come out with like basically a variant of Kevin Garnett. And then on top of that, the consistency, the fact that Boston was a top defense up until 2013. And the fact that he started right away, he came in the league a teenager and was already like a 1 through 5 defender. I just think Kevin Garnett is like, I think if I were doing an all-time list, it'd be Bill Russell, Olajuwon, and then it'd be Garnett. And to me, it's just, Garnett's just awesome, man.
Yeah, he's another one who came into the league as a 3. He was a Swiss Army knife on defense, and then he started playing the 4 and became one of the best defensive rebounders of all time. Very interesting.
Rebounding 4 straight years.
But like, I think the thing that I struggle with KG is because like I'm super high on KG, and I'm like, I've been making the argument that I think Tim Duncan and KG are interchangeable just as players in general. Like, I don't know who the better player is. And I think the thing that I guess leads me to that point is I do think I end up putting a bit of like modern day bias towards it, whereas like KG in today's game, I think would like undoubtedly be the more valuable player than Tim Duncan. And I think that plays maybe a bit too much into my opinion of KG, because like back then he was still, in my opinion, the best or the second best defender in the league, and then Ben Wallace, so top 3 defender in the league. But his skill set was less valuable than maybe a Tim Duncan, who was a pure defensive anchor, who was an elite post defender. I think those were the areas that KG, I guess, lacked more so, where that post defense where he wasn't as great, or that pure rim protection where he wasn't as great, where he could just anchor the middle. But then you look at the versatility, you look at the switchability, you look at the amount of schemes you can deploy him in, you look at the motor, which I think is matched by no one. And then the longevity of it all is still amazing, because like even after he tore his meniscus, just off pure intelligence, communication, and awareness, he was still an elite defender up until he got to Brooklyn. And even in Brooklyn, he was actually a good defender.
Like the first
year,
I know
we see like the washed KG memes in Brooklyn. Like even then, he was still a good defender. So it's like,
even the the very last year that he ever played in Minnesota, him and Karl Anthony Towns on the court together were like a +7 net rating or something.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so like, and they had like an elite defense. Like Kevin Garnett with rookie Cat was an elite defense.
I think I don't know. I think I might lean towards KG for today. Tomorrow I might lean Tim Duncan. But like he was just so athletically gifted in terms of the amount of ground he could cover. And I think he did benefit from now you're not having to make closeout from 3-point line to the paint. It was 18 feet to the rim. So the closeouts were shorter and the distance he had to cover was shorter. But if there was anyone who you could rely on to cover that distance consistently, it was him. And the amount of times I'm seeing him pick up point guards, the amount of times I'm seeing him guard small forwards, the amount of times I'm watching him guard bigs, like he's one of the few legitimate 1 through 5 defenders in history. I know that label gets thrown around a lot, but he is him. Dennis Rodman could do it.
Yeah. Draymond.
I think Draymond could do it. I think those are the 4 off the top of my head. Bill Russell could go up 1 through 5.
But that was like a fake 1 through 5.
Yeah, it's like, I guess. All right, cool. You got 1 through 5. Okay. But like he's one of the few that could do it, is my point. So yeah, today I'm gonna go with the KG side of it. Sorry, John, you're by yourself. But I don't think I think 1 through 4, I don't think there's a wrong answer, if I'm being honest. I think
the
Green case is easy.
I'm so glad we all had the same 4. That was like my big thing. I was like, I feel like there's a clear 4, and we all hit it. So
yeah,
I feel good about that.
Good work, guys. Good work.
You saying you didn't want to see Drew Holiday in my top 5?
I was ready for the Marcus Smart name drop, bro.
I'm glad we
got DPOY since '96.
I'm glad we all had like somewhat different lists, because I was fighting some serious allegations the last guest we had on with Nerd Sesh. Me and Carson had a very identical list. I was fighting some
it was more than suspicious, John. You was blatantly cheating. But
before
you messaged them before the show and said, "Hey, just give me your list." Is that what you did?
That's what it seemed like.
Before we leave, could I also name one more guy that was in my like group of 5 honorable mentions? 2019 Joel Embiid was someone I heavily
considered.
My
honorable mentions as well.
He was unreal.
Embiid doesn't get enough credit as a defender, maybe it's because like he's an all-time level scorer. But
yes,
like
as a drop defender, bro, as a drop,
Joel doesn't get enough credit as a player, period. But that's
facts. No, you're cooking.
But yeah, he's the best. Other than Rudy, I do think he's the best drop defender we've had in like the last decade, in my opinion. I don't think there's anyone better than him.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Because that's post Roy Hibbert era. But the issues with Joel, I do think, come down to motor and consistency. But in the playoffs, he always ramps up his defense. Like
even on one knee against the Knicks, he was like shutting down stuff and drop.
Yeah,
the paint was pretty much impenetrable for the Knicks. It was just Jalen Brunson decided to be the king of the paint, non-restricted area, and ridiculous at just making mid-range jumpers. But yeah, Joel was someone who I was tough with. I was surprised no one like brought up like peak LeBron. I thought that was someone who I was going to expect to hear. Maybe not as a like
honorable mention,
but as an honorable mention. Because I do think that level of versatility he provided, being able to unlock some of those small ball lineups was great. I'm not gonna lie to you, I still don't have a number 10. Like I have 9 names on my list. I still don't have a number 10.
Joakim Noah is another guy I thought of.
Hey, my Chicago bias is
I thought of Joakim. I thought of Tyson Chandler.
Marc Gasol too. Marc Gasol.
I had Tony Allen.
I did unironically.
I was surprised that nobody mentioned when you brought up Mobley and Chet. I would also have Jaren Jackson with that group. Triple J.
Yeah, the issues with Jaren, I think FIBA hurt him a lot for some reason. I think what happened with that FIBA team.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And also it's the rebound. I don't think he's a 5 either.
Right, that's what the struggle is, that he's not a true anchor like the other guy. It's a little bit different.
With him. That's why I would favor guys like Mobley and Chet to a lesser extent, but Mobley in particular.
Damn.
But yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I still don't have a number 10. So I have 9 names, and I'm just gonna live with 9. I don't have any 10. Actually, you know what?
Dyson Daniels, man.
Now, Amen Thompson. There we go. Amen.
There you go.
Amen Thompson's a special defender. But that does bring us to the end of our top 10s. I do want to put this on the screen for everyone to see so they can see what we came up with. I think we did a pretty good job. So let me make sure I've got everything right here. These are the lists we came up with. I'm gonna read mine, and then I'm gonna ask everyone to read theirs individually. So I have Amen Thompson at 10. Take that with a grain of salt. I have Victor Wembanyama at 9, Dwight Howard at 8, Kawhi at 7, Rudy Gobert at 6, Anthony Davis at 5, Ben Wallace at 4, Draymond Green at 3. Yes, I did flip that in the last 10 minutes. Tim Duncan at 2, and Kevin Garnett at 1. Tyler, would you like to tell the people?
Yes, sir. I had Dikembe Mutombo number 10, David Robinson number 9, Rudy Gobert number 8, Giannis 7th, AD 6th, Dwight Howard 5th, Draymond 4th, Tim Duncan 3rd, Ben Wallace 2nd, and the GOAT defender of the 21st century, the big ticket, Kevin Garnett.
And Sean?
I had Victor Wembanyama at 10th, Kawhi Leonard at 9th, David Robinson 8th, Dwight Howard 7th, Rudy Gobert 6th, Anthony Davis at 5, Ben Wallace at 4, Draymond Green 3, Tim Duncan 2, and Kevin Garnett number 1.
And John D?
I had Victor Wembanyama at 10, Dikembe Mutombo at 9, Shaquille O'Neal at 8, Rudy Gobert at 7, Anthony Davis at 6, Kawhi Leonard at 5, Ben Wallace at number 4, Draymond Green at number 3, Kevin Garnett at number 2, and Tim Duncan at number 1.
There we go. That does it. We did it in good time. Last time he was here with the Nerd Session guys, we took 3 hours. So I'm glad that we did this in 2 hours. I didn't want to hold you guys for too long. I had fun. I hope you guys had fun. I hope
It was wild, man.
Yeah,
Appreciate you.
This was great.
If we do an offensive list, I would love to have you guys back on. I think hopefully the people would want to see it if they do. Even if they don't, fuck them. We gonna do it.
I actively want to be a part of that because that's like my favorite discussion in all of basketball is offensive peaks, dude. Let me get my Steve Nash off, bro. Come on now.
I'm not gonna lie, that'd be way easier too. Like I still right now with the list being finalized, I have no confidence in my list. Like
the thing that makes it so tough with the defenders is there's no numbers to go off of. It's like
you're just doing
rebounds and then team stuff. Like offense, you can visibly see production.
So I do think we probably will do an offensive list, and if you guys are down, I would love to have you guys back. This was fun. I definitely did enjoy it. Leave comments obviously about what your top 10 would be. Like the video, go subscribe to Tyler's individual channel, go subscribe to their podcast, go subscribe to Sean's channel. All of their links are in the description. I do think I did my job correctly. But until next week, I will see you guys on Player's Choice. Tyler, where can everyone find you? Sean, where can everyone find you?
Everyone can find me on Hoop Venue. Just search Hoop Venue on a platform. You will find something, and I will be posting content there. So Hoop Venue is all my stuff.
You guys can find me on Twitter at Sean_DAVI. Obviously, Hoop Venue Podcast and the Sports Headline Show on YouTube.
And John D, where can everyone find you?
You guys can find me over at the Buzzer Sports on YouTube. You know, we just got monetized, so I appreciate everybody who has been subbing and has been watching my videos. You know, it's been a very, very exciting journey over the past year, you know, just starting YouTube. And this is something I didn't think I'd be like thriving in really, because now it's like a lot of people I watched before I started, I've shared screens with. I think this was like my last checklist, literally. Like I've shared a screen with Pick a Side, Hoop Venue, Mars, Chill. There's only one more that I watched that I would like to share a screen with, but that might come later down the line.
Well,
but anyway,
or something. Right?
Oh, okay. Nah. But yeah, I appreciate everybody who has been subscribing. You know what I'm saying? I post film breakdowns. I do a lot of draft work. So that's my niche within the niche. So appreciate everybody subscribing.
There we go. So that's everyone's channel. Subscribe here as well. Subscribe to all of their channels. Thank you guys for watching. I will see you next week. We have a super chat.
Yeah.
See, this is why I need John D to save me. Kent Lipscomb Jr. with the final super chat of the show. He said Tim Duncan over Jokic, Tim Duncan top 5, Tim Duncan better. Quadruple double 03 finals, game 6. Go watch it. Love the pod, guys. He did get a quadruple double. I can confirm that he got a quadruple double.
Yeah, for sure.
The fact he doesn't have one on his record is ridiculous. And the fact it was a finals game is special. But maybe sooner rather than later we will get into our top 10 offensive players. Because I hopefully we'll get you back on soon. I'll talk to you guys. But until then, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. And I will see you when I see you.